Hannah Crawford stood in the dusty street of Willow Creek, her brother-in-law's words still burning in her ears. "We don't have room for a woman with 3 mouths to feed." 300 miles she'd traveled with her boys, burying her husband along the way, clinging to the promise of family, only to find a door slammed in her face. $20. 3 hungry children. And a storm rolling in across the Colorado horizon. This is the story of how rejection became the first step toward redemption. Stay with me until the end and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The wagon wheels had stopped turning 2 hours ago, but Hannah Crawford's hands still trembled with the memory of the rains. 300 miles of dust and sorrow had brought her here, to this ramshackle collection of buildings that folks called Willow Creek, Colorado. The year was 1879, and the frontier town looked exactly like Hope felt, weathered, worn, and barely holding together. She stood now in front of a 2-story building with peeling paint and crooked shutters, her 3 sons pressed against her skirts like birds seeking shelter before a storm. And indeed, a storm was coming. Hannah could feel it in the weight of the air, see it in the purple-black clouds gathering over the distant mountains, but the storm in her heart had arrived first. "I said we don't have room." Thomas Crawford, her late husband's brother, stood in the doorway with his arms crossed over his barrel chest, his face set in lines of stone. Behind him, Hannah caught a glimpse of his wife, Martha, turning away, unwilling or unable to meet her eyes. "Thomas, please." Hannah's voice cracked despite her determination to stay strong. "We've come so far. The boys are exhausted, and I have nowhere else." "Should have thought of that before you left Kansas." Thomas cut her off, his words sharp as a whip crack. "James made his choices, and you made yours following him out here. Now he's dead, and that's not my burden to carry." Hannah felt her youngest son, 6-year-old Samuel, begin to cry softly against her leg. Her middle boy, 9-year-old Noah, stood rigid with the effort of being brave, and her eldest, 12-year-old Elijah, had his fists clenched so tight his knuckles had gone white. "We won't be a burden," Hannah said, desperation creeping into her voice despite her best efforts. "I can work, I can cook, clean, help with—" "We don't need help." Thomas's jaw worked like he was chewing on something bitter. "And we sure as hell don't need 3 more mouths to feed. I've got my own family to think about. Times are hard enough without taking in every stray that comes begging." The word stray hit Hannah like a physical blow. She straightened her spine, pulling what remained of her dignity around her like a cloak. "We're not strays," she said quietly. "We're family." "Family?" Thomas let out a harsh laugh. "James left 5 years ago against Pa's wishes, chasing some fool dream out west. Married you without so much as a letter home. Never sent word, never came back, never gave a damn about the family he left behind. Now you show up on my doorstep with your hand out, expecting what? That I'll welcome you with open arms because you share a name." Hannah's throat tightened. Everything he said was true, in a way. James had been headstrong, impulsive, always chasing the next opportunity over the horizon. She'd loved him for it once, that wild optimism, that unshakable belief that fortune was just 1 more mile down the road. But optimism didn't feed children, and belief didn't cure cholera. "He died 3 weeks ago," Hannah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Outside of Pueblo. There was an outbreak. He made me promise to bring the boys here, to you. He said family would help." For just a moment, something flickered across Thomas's face. Regret, maybe, or grief for a brother he'd written off years ago. But it vanished as quickly as it came, replaced by that same stony resolve. "Then he lied," Thomas said. "Wouldn't be the first time." "I'm sorry for your loss, Hannah, truly, but I've got Martha and 4 children of my own, a failing grain business, and creditors breathing down my neck. I can't take on 3 more dependents. You'll have to find your own way." "With what?" The words burst out of Hannah before she could stop them. "I have $20 to my name, Thomas. $20 and 3 children and a wagon that's held together with hope and baling wire. The nearest town of any size is 40 miles from here. Where exactly am I supposed to go?" Thomas's face hardened further, if that was possible. "That's not my problem. You made your bed when you married my brother. Now you've got to lie in it." He started to close the door, then paused. There's a boarding house 2 streets over. Mrs. Henley might rent you a room if you ask nice. Beyond that, I can't help you." The door closed with a finality that echoed through Hannah's chest like a coffin lid. She stood there for a long moment, unable to move, unable to process what had just happened. The last fragile thread of hope she'd been clinging to had just been severed, and she was falling into a darkness that had no bottom. "Mama?" Samuel's small voice broke through her paralysis. "Are we staying with Uncle Thomas?" Hannah looked down at her baby boy's upturned face, streaked with tears and dust from the long journey. How could she tell him? How could she explain that family sometimes meant nothing more than shared blood, and that blood could run cold as a mountain stream? "No, sweetheart," she managed, forcing her voice to stay steady. We're going to find somewhere else to stay." "I don't like Uncle Thomas," Samuel said with the brutal honesty of childhood. "He's mean." "He's scared," Hannah found herself saying, though she wasn't sure why she was defending him. Sometimes scared people do mean things. "Can we eat soon?" Noah asked, always practical. "I'm powerful hungry." Hannah's heart clenched. When had they last eaten? Yesterday morning, the last of the bread and salt pork she'd rationed so carefully. She'd given most of her portion to the boys, as she'd been doing for days. Soon, she promised, though she had no idea how she'd keep that promise. Elijah hadn't spoken. He stood slightly apart from his brothers, staring at the closed door with an expression that was far too old for his 12 years. Hannah recognized it because she felt it in her own chest: betrayal, anger, and beneath it all, a bone-deep weariness that came from hoping and losing, until hope itself became a burden too heavy to carry. "Come on," Hannah said, taking Samuel's hand and guiding her boys back toward the wagon. "Let's see about that boarding house." But as they walked back down the street, Hannah felt the eyes of the town on them. Women in doorways whispered behind their hands. Men on the boardwalk found sudden reason to study their boots. A few children pointed until their mothers shushed them. By now, everyone in this small town knew who she was and what had just happened. News traveled fast in places like this, and shame traveled faster. The boarding house, when they found it, was a sagging 2-story structure that looked like it had been weathered by 1,000 storms and had finally decided to surrender. A hand-painted sign hung crooked over the door. "Henley's Rooms, clean beds, fair prices, no drunks." Hannah tied the horses, 2 spavined mares that James had traded for in their final days together, to the hitching post and climbed the steps. The boards groaned under her weight, and she wondered absently if the whole structure might simply collapse beneath her, saving her the trouble of figuring out what came next. She knocked, waited, knocked again. The door opened to reveal a woman who might have been 50 or might have been 70, with iron gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and eyes that had the sharp, assessing quality of someone who'd learned to judge character quickly and accurately. "Mrs. Henley?" Hannah asked. "Depends on who's asking and what they want." Hannah drew a breath. "My name is Hannah Crawford. I have 3 sons, and we need a room, just for a few days until I can figure out—" "Heard about you already," Mrs. Henley interrupted. "Widow woman, traveling alone, just got turned away by Thomas Crawford." Her mouth twisted. "That man's got a heart like a dried-up well. Don't know how Martha stands him." Hope flickered weakly in Hannah's chest. "Then, you'll rent us a room?" Mrs. Henley's expression softened slightly. "How much money you got?" Hannah hesitated, then decided on honesty. $20. $20. Mrs. Henley repeated the words like they were a diagnosis of some terminal illness. "And how long you think $20 is going to last, feeding 3 growing boys and keeping a roof over your heads?" "I'll find work," Hannah said quickly. "I can cook, clean, sew. I used to teach school back in Kansas. I'm not afraid of hard work, Mrs. Henley. I just need a chance." The older woman studied her for a long moment, and Hannah felt like she was being measured against some invisible standard weighed and found wanting. "I charge $3 a week for a room," Mrs. Henley said finally. "That includes breakfast and supper, but you'll have to fend for yourselves at midday. I don't run a charity." $3 a week. Hannah's stomach sank. That would give them less than 7 weeks before the money ran out completely. "I'll take it," she said, because what choice did she have? Mrs. Henley nodded. Rooms on the second floor, end of the hall. Shared privy out back, no cooking in the rooms, and I lock the front door at 9 o'clock sharp. You're out past 9, you sleep in the street. Thank you, Hannah whispered. You don't know what this means. Save your thanks, Mrs. Henley cut her off. Pay your rent on time and keep those boys from tearing up my house, and we'll get along fine. Now get your things and get settled. Supper's at 6. The room, when Hannah saw it, was smaller than she'd imagined. A narrow space with 2 beds, a washstand, and a single window that looked out over the alley. But it was clean, and it was shelter, and for now, that had to be enough. The boys immediately claimed one bed, flopping down on it with groans of relief. Elijah lay on his back staring at the ceiling. Noah curled on his side. Samuel, exhausted beyond measure, was asleep almost instantly. Hannah sat on the edge of the other bed and allowed herself, for the first time since Thomas had closed his door, to feel the full weight of her situation. $20, 3 children depending on her. No husband, no family, no prospects in a town where everyone already knew she'd been rejected by her own kin. She'd traveled 300 miles for this. 300 miles of hope that had died the moment Thomas's door had closed. Hannah put her face in her hands, pressing hard against her eyes to keep the tears from falling. She couldn't break down. Not now. Not when her sons might wake and see her despair. She had to be strong, had to be steel, had to be everything James had been too reckless to be. God help me, she prayed silently. Show me the way. Give me strength. But the only answer was the sound of wind picking up outside, carrying with it the first cold drops of the coming storm. Supper at Mrs. Henley's boarding house was a subdued affair. Hannah and her boys sat at one end of a long table, trying to be invisible among the other boarders, a traveling salesman with tired eyes, 2 ranch hands who smelled of horses and leather, and an elderly man who Mrs. Henley introduced only as Mr. Polk, before serving up bowls of watery stew and thick slices of dark bread. The boys ate like they'd been starving, which, Hannah reflected bitterly, wasn't far from the truth. She ate slowly, mechanically, tasting nothing. Her mind was already spinning ahead, trying to calculate possibilities. $20. -3 for this week's rent left 17. If she was careful, very careful, she might stretch that to 2 months. 2 months to find work in a town where she had no connections, no references, and the mark of rejection branded on her forehead by Thomas Crawford's refusal. What kind of work could she do? Teaching would be ideal, but small frontier towns rarely had schools. And when they did, the positions went to men or to women with local ties. Cooking, then. Cleaning. Taking in laundry, perhaps, though she'd need to buy soap and have access to hot water, and the calculations tangled in her head like a knot she couldn't unravel. Ma'am? Hannah looked up to find one of the ranch hands watching her. He was young, maybe 25, with sun-weathered skin and kind eyes. Yes? Couldn't help but overhear earlier. You're looking for work? Hope sparked. Yes. Do you know of anything? The young man exchanged a glance with his companion, then shook his head slowly. Not really. Maybe the general store might need help, but old Mr. Peterson's pretty particular about who he hires. There's the saloon, but that's no place for a lady with children. I see. Hannah's voice came out flat. Thank you anyway. You might try the ranches, the other ranch hand offered. Some of the bigger spreads hire on cooks or housekeepers. The ranches are 20, 30 miles out, Mrs. Henley interjected sharply. How's she supposed to get there with 3 children and no transportation? That wagon out front won't make it 5 miles before it falls apart. The ranch hands had no answer to that. Hannah excused herself as soon as the boys had finished eating, herding them upstairs before her composure could crack completely. She got them washed and into their nightshirts, listened to Samuel's prayers, God bless Mama and Elijah and Noah, and please let Papa see us from heaven, and tucked them into bed. Mama? Elijah's voice came soft in the darkness. What are we going to do? Hannah sat on the edge of their bed, smoothing the blanket. We're going to be fine, Eli. I'll find work, and we'll get settled, and everything will work out. But what if it doesn't? The question hung in the air like smoke, Hannah wanted to tell him not to worry, that mothers always found a way, that faith and hard work were enough. But Elijah was 12 years old and had already seen his father die of cholera in a roadside camp. He deserved more than empty reassurances. "Then we'll figure something else out," Hannah said quietly. "I won't let anything happen to you boys. That's a promise." Elijah studied her face in the dim light filtering through the window. "Uncle Thomas was supposed to help us." "I know. Papa said family always helps." "Your papa," Hannah's voice caught. "Your papa believed the best in people. Sometimes that's a wonderful quality. Sometimes it means you get disappointed." "I hate Uncle Thomas," Elijah said, with sudden vehemence. "Eli, I do. He's mean and selfish, and I hate him." Hannah didn't correct him. She couldn't, because part of her felt exactly the same way. "Get some sleep," she said instead, kissing his forehead. "Tomorrow's a new day." But as she lay in her own bed that night, listening to her sons breathe and the rain begin to hammer against the window, Hannah wondered what tomorrow could possibly bring that would be any better than today. Morning came gray and miserable, the storm having settled in with the grim determination of a season changing. Hannah dressed in her best remaining dress, which wasn't saying much after 300 miles on the trail, and prepared to go out looking for work. "I want to come with you," Elijah said. "You need to stay here with your brothers." "I can help. I can work too." Hannah looked at her eldest son, standing there with his shoulders back and his chin up, trying so hard to be a man. Something in her chest cracked a little. "I know you can," she said gently. "But right now I need you to do something even more important. Keep Noah and Samuel safe. Can you do that for me?" Elijah nodded slowly, understanding that she was giving him a responsibility, not brushing him aside. "Don't leave this building," Hannah instructed. "Mrs. Henley said there's a sitting room downstairs where you can wait. I'll be back before lunch." She kissed each of her boys, pulled on her threadbare shawl, and stepped out into the rain. Willow Creek looked even more dismal in the wet gray light. The main street had turned to mud, and the few people who were out hurried along with their heads down, not making eye contact. Hannah walked from shop to shop, asking about work. The general store. "Not hiring, sorry." The milliner. "Can't afford help." The restaurant. "Maybe in the spring." The dress shop. A curt shake of the head before Hannah could even finish asking. By noon, she was soaked through, exhausted, and no closer to finding employment than she'd been at dawn. She trudged back to the boarding house, trying to figure out what to try next. The boys were waiting in the sitting room, and their faces lit up when they saw her. "Did you find work?" Noah asked eagerly. "Not yet," Hannah said, forcing a smile. "But I'll keep looking." She changed into dry clothes and divided the last of the bread and cheese she'd brought with them, trying not to think about what would happen when that ran out. The boys ate hungrily, and she nibbled at her portion while mentally counting the coins in her purse. $19.65. Already, the money was shrinking. That afternoon, desperate now, Hannah ventured to the saloon, not to ask for work there, but to inquire about any ranches that might be hiring. The bartender, a grizzled man with gray stubble, looked her up and down with obvious skepticism. "Most ranches hire their crews in the spring," he said, "and they don't generally take on women with kids. No offense, ma'am, but ranch work is hard and dangerous. Nobody wants to worry about children underfoot." "I'm not looking for ranch work," Hannah said, struggling to keep her voice level. "I'm a cook. I can keep house. Surely someone needs—" "Circle B could use someone," the bartender interrupted. "Dawson Baxter's housekeeper quit last month, but that's 30 miles west, and Baxter's particular about who he brings onto his place. You'd have to go out there and ask him yourself." 30 miles. With a wagon that was falling apart and horses that were barely fit to pull it. "Thank you," Hannah said quietly, and left before her humiliation could become complete. She returned to the boarding house to find Mrs. Henley waiting for her in the front hall. "There was a man here looking for you," the older woman said. "Thomas Crawford." Hannah's heart sank. "What did he want?" "Didn't say. Just asked if you were here and said he'd be back." Mrs. Henley's expression was unreadable. He looked troubled. Troubled. Hannah almost laughed at the word. Thomas had turned her away without a second thought. What could he possibly be troubled about now? She didn't have long to wonder. Less than an hour later, there was a knock on her door. "Hannah?" Thomas's voice came through the wood. "Can we talk?" She almost didn't answer. Almost let him stand out there in the hall, feeling a fraction of the rejection she'd felt on his doorstep. But that wasn't who she was, no matter how much she might want to be that person in this moment. She opened the door. Thomas stood there with his hat in his hands, rain dripping from his coat. He looked older than he had yesterday, the lines around his eyes deeper. "I can't let you stay with us," he said without preamble. "That hasn't changed, but Martha, she convinced me I was too harsh yesterday. So I asked around town and I heard the Circle B might need help." Hannah stared at him. "The bartender already told me that." "The thing is," Thomas continued, not meeting her eyes, "Baxter's place is 30 miles out, and your wagon won't make it, so I brought you this." He pulled a worn leather purse from his pocket. $50. It's not much, but it'll get you a better wagon and supplies for the journey, and maybe tide you over until you find your feet. Hannah looked at the purse like it was a snake. "I don't want your charity." "It's not charity," Thomas said quickly. "It's, consider it a loan. Pay me back when you can." He thrust the purse toward her. "Please, Hannah, let me do this much." She wanted to refuse, wanted to throw his guilt money back in his face and slam the door. But $50 was more than twice what she had. $50 might mean the difference between survival and something she didn't want to think about. Slowly, hating herself a little, Hannah took the purse. "I'll pay you back," she said coldly. "Every cent." Thomas nodded, relief evident on his face. "I know you will. And Hannah, I am sorry about James, about all of it." Hannah said nothing, and after a moment Thomas turned and walked away. She stood there holding the purse, feeling the weight of it, the weight of Thomas's guilt and her own compromised pride. $70 now. $70 and a lead on possible work 30 miles west. It wasn't much, but it was something. It was a chance. 2 days later, Hannah stood in the livery yard, negotiating for a better wagon. The liveryman was a shrewd old character who knew desperation when he saw it, but he also seemed to have a streak of fairness. "This one's solid," he said, patting the side of a sturdy farm wagon. "Belonged to a family that went back east. Axles are good, wheels are true, bed's tight. She'll get you where you're going and back again." "How much?" $45. Hannah's heart sank. "I'll give you 30. They settled on 35, and Hannah walked away with a wagon that didn't creak ominously with every turn of the wheels. She bought supplies, flour, beans, salt pork, coffee, and a few other necessities, and found herself with just over $20 remaining. $20 and a 30-mile journey to a ranch that might or might not need help, to ask a man she'd never met for a job she might not get. But it was a chance, the only chance she had. On the morning they were set to leave, Mrs. Henley came out to see them off. She pressed a basket into Hannah's hands, bread, cheese, some apples, and a jar of preserves. "For the journey," the older woman said gruffly. "And Hannah? That Baxter fellow. He's supposed to be a decent man. Fair employer, treats his people right. You could do worse." "Thank you," Hannah said, and meant it. "For everything." "You pay your debts and raise those boys right," Mrs. Henley replied. "That'll be thanks enough." Hannah climbed onto the wagon seat. Her sons settled in the back with their few possessions and took up the reins. As they rolled out of Willow Creek, she didn't look back at her brother-in-law's house. Didn't look back at the town that had offered her nothing but rejection and grudging assistance. She looked ahead, toward the mountains in the distance, toward the unknown, toward whatever came next. The road west was rutted and rough, and by afternoon dark clouds were gathering again. Hannah pushed the horses as hard as she dared, but progress was slow. They passed empty prairie, clusters of cattle, the occasional distant homestead. The land seemed to stretch forever, beautiful and harsh, and utterly indifferent to the struggles of one widow and her 3 sons. As the sun began to sink toward the horizon, Hannah started to worry. They should have reached the Circle B by now, according to the directions the liveryman had given her. Had she missed a turnoff? Taken a wrong fork in the road? "Mama, look!" Noah pointed ahead. Hannah squinted through the gathering dusk and saw it, a gate made of rough-hewn logs. with a sign overhead bearing the brand Circle B. Relief flooded through her. She guided the wagon through the gate and up a long drive that curved through rolling hills dotted with cattle. And then as they crested a rise, she saw it. A sprawling ranch house with a wide porch, surrounded by barns and corrals and outbuildings. Smoke rose from the chimney, lanterns glowed in the windows. It looked like civilization. It looked like hope. Hannah urged the tired horses forward, her heart hammering against her ribs. This was it. This was the moment that would determine everything. As they approached the house, a figure emerged from the barn. A tall man in a worn coat and a dusty hat, moving with the economical grace of someone who spent his life on horseback. Hannah pulled the wagon to a stop and climbed down on legs that shook with exhaustion and nerves. The man approached, and in the fading light, she got her first clear look at Dawson Baxter. He was older than she'd expected, maybe 45, with a weathered face that spoke of years in the sun and wind. His eyes were gray-blue, assessing but not unkind. He moved like someone who was comfortable in his own skin, unhurried and sure. "Can I help you, ma'am?" His voice was deep, quiet, the accent pure Colorado with a hint of something southern underneath. Hannah drew herself up, trying to project confidence she didn't feel. "My name is Hannah Crawford. I'm looking for work. I heard you might need a housekeeper." Dawson's eyes moved from her to the wagon, to the three faces peering out from the back, then returned to her. "You drove out here from town? 30 miles with 3 children?" "I did." "In weather like this?" He gestured at the darkening sky, where lightning was beginning to flicker. "I didn't have much choice," Hannah said simply. Dawson studied her for a long moment, and Hannah felt like he was seeing far more than she wanted to show. Her desperation, her pride, the bone-deep weariness that came from fighting too long against impossible odds. "Storm's coming," he said finally. "You and your boys best come inside. We can talk about work tomorrow when you're not dead on your feet." It wasn't an offer of employment, but it was shelter, and right now that was enough. "Thank you, Mr. Baxter," Hannah said quietly. "Dawson," he corrected. "Mr. Baxter was my father, and he's been dead 10 years. Come on, let's get you folks settled before the sky opens up." He helped her unhitch the horses and led them into the barn, then walked Hannah and her boys to the house. Inside, a plump woman with rosy cheeks and flour on her apron looked up in surprise. "Mrs. Abernathy," Dawson said, "we have guests. Can you set 3 more places for supper and prepare the spare room?" "Of course, Mr. Baxter." The housekeeper's eyes went wide with curiosity, but she didn't ask questions. "You boys hungry? I've got stew on the stove and biscuits in the oven." Samuel nodded vigorously, and even Elijah looked interested. "Go on," Hannah told them softly. "Mind your manners," as Mrs. S. Abernathy shepherded the boys toward the kitchen. Dawson turned to Hannah. "You look like you could use some food yourself, Mrs. Crawford." "Hannah?" she said, echoing his earlier correction. "Hannah." He said her name carefully, like he was testing the feel of it. "When's the last time you ate?" "This morning." A lie. She'd given most of her breakfast to Noah. Dawson's expression suggested he didn't believe her, but he didn't press. "Well, come on then. Mrs. Abernathy's stew will put some strength back in you." As thunder rumbled in the distance and the first fat drops of rain began to fall, Hannah followed Dawson Baxter into the warmth of his house, her son's laughter already drifting from the kitchen. For the first time since James had died, for the first time since Thomas had closed his door, for the first time in longer than she could remember, Hannah felt something unfurl cautiously in her chest. Not hope, not yet, but maybe possibility. The stew was rich and thick, full of beef and vegetables that had been simmered until they were tender enough to melt on the tongue. Hannah watched her boys eat with an intensity that made her throat tight. When was the last time they'd had a proper hot meal? When was the last time she'd seen Samuel's cheeks flush with warmth instead of cold, or heard Noah laugh at something as simple as a second helping of biscuits? Mrs. Abernathy hovered over them like a mother hen, refilling bowls before they were empty and pressing more bread into small hands that reached for it eagerly. The housekeeper was perhaps 60, with silver hair tucked under a white cap and eyes that crinkled at the corners when she smiled. She moved through the kitchen with the comfortable authority of someone who'd ruled this domain for years. "You poor dears," she said, watching the boys eat. "When did you last have a decent supper?" "We've been traveling," Hannah said carefully, not wanting to sound like she was asking for pity. "It's been difficult to cook on the road." "I should say so." Mrs. Abernathy turned to Dawson, who sat at the head of the table nursing a cup of coffee. "Mr. Baxter, these children need feeding up. Look at them, thin as rails." "Then it's a good thing they're here," Dawson said mildly. His eyes met Hannah's across the table, and she saw something there. Not pity, but understanding. "Mrs. Crawford, why don't you tell me what brought you to Colorado?" Hannah set down her spoon, suddenly aware that this was the real conversation, the one that would determine whether they stayed or were sent back out into the rain. She chose her words carefully. "My husband James and I came west 5 years ago from Kansas. He had heard there were opportunities in mining, in ranching, in the new territories. We tried our hand at several things, a claim near Leadville that didn't pan out, a freight business that failed, some farm work near Pueblo." She paused, gathering herself. 3 weeks ago, James contracted cholera. He didn't survive. Before he died, he made me promise to take the boys to his brother in Willow Creek. He said Thomas would help us." "But Thomas didn't," Dawson said. It wasn't a question. "No, he has his own family, his own struggles. I understand that." The words tasted like ashes, but Hannah forced them out. "So I've been looking for work, for a way to support my sons. Someone in town mentioned you might need a housekeeper." Dawson glanced at Mrs. Abernathy, who was suddenly very busy wiping down the counter. "My housekeeper quit last month, said the isolation was too much for her. She wanted to be closer to town, closer to, well, to prospects, I suppose." She wasn't wrong. This ranch is 30 miles from Willow Creek, and we don't make the trip often. Winters can be harsh. It's lonely out here. "I'm not afraid of loneliness," Hannah said quietly, "and I'm not afraid of hard work." "What kind of work have you done?" "I taught school in Kansas before I married. Since then, I've cooked, cleaned, taken in laundry, helped with farm work, kept books for my husband's freight business." Hannah lifted her chin. "I'm not particular about the type of work, Mr. Baxter. I just need honest employment and a place for my boys to sleep safe." Dawson took a long sip of his coffee, his expression thoughtful. Outside, the storm had arrived in full force, rain hammering against the windows and wind howling around the eaves. It seemed to emphasize her point. There was nowhere else to go. Not tonight, maybe not for a long time. "Mrs. Abernathy," Dawson said, "how much help could you use around here?" The older woman turned, wiping her hands on her apron. "Well, Mr. Baxter, I'm not getting any younger. The cooking and cleaning for the main house is manageable, but during roundup or when the crew's all here, it gets to be too much for one person. And truth be told, my knees aren't what they used to be. All those stairs, all that bending and scrubbing. So you could use an extra pair of hands." "I could." Mrs. Abernathy's eyes were kind as they rested on Hannah. "And if Mrs. Crawford is willing to learn the way we do things here, I'd be happy to teach her." Hannah's heart began to beat faster. "I'm a quick learner, and I promise I'll work hard. You won't regret—" Dawson held up a hand. "Let's talk plainly, Mrs. Crawford. This is a working ranch. We run about 2,000 head of cattle, and I employ anywhere from 8 to 20 men depending on the season. Right now we're coming into winter, so the crew is smaller, just 5 full-time hands plus my foreman. But come spring, this place gets busy. The work is constant, and the days are long. If you take a position here, you'll be expected to earn your keep." "I understand." "The pay is $25 a month plus room and board for you and your boys. You'll share the workload with Mrs. Abernathy, cooking, cleaning, laundry, whatever needs doing. You'll have Sundays off unless there's an emergency. The accommodations are a small cabin behind the main house with 2 bedrooms, a stove, and a decent roof." He paused. "It's not luxurious, but it's warm and dry. $25 a month, a cabin, room and board." Hannah felt dizzy with relief so intense it was almost painful. "When can I start?" she asked. "You already have," Dawson said with the faintest hint of a smile. Welcome to the Circle B, Mrs. Crawford. Hannah's vision blurred with tears she refused to let fall. Thank you. You won't regret this, I swear to you. Don't thank me yet, Dawson interrupted, but his tone was gentle. You might hate it here by next week. Ranch life isn't easy, especially for someone not used to it. I won't hate it, Hannah said with absolute certainty. And I won't let you down. Dawson studied her for a moment longer, then nodded. All right then. Mrs. Abernathy, why don't you show Mrs. Crawford and her boys to the cabin? They look about ready to drop. The cabin was small but sturdy, built of logs chinked with clay and moss. The main room held a cast-iron stove, a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs, and a worn but comfortable-looking sofa. 2 doors led to small bedrooms, each with a simple bed and a chest of drawers. Someone, Mrs. Abernathy, Hannah guessed, had already started a fire in the stove, and the space was blessedly warm. It's not much, Mrs. Abernathy said, lighting a lamp, but it's yours. There's linens in the chest, firewood stacked outside, and the privy is just beyond that stand of trees. Water pump is between here and the main house. It's perfect, Hannah said, and meant it. After weeks of sleeping in the wagon or in cramped boarding house rooms, this felt like a palace. Get some rest tonight, Mrs. Abernathy advised. Tomorrow I'll show you the ropes. Breakfast is at 5:30 for the hands, 6 for Mr. Baxter. We'll start you off slow until you learn the routine. After the housekeeper left, Hannah got her boys settled into one bedroom while she took the other. Samuel fell asleep almost instantly, but Elijah lay awake staring at the ceiling. Mama, he whispered. Are we really staying? Yes, baby, we're really staying. For how long? As long as we need to, as long as they'll have us. Hannah smoothed his hair back from his forehead. We're going to be all right, Eli, I promise. I could work too, Elijah said. I'm strong. I could help with the cattle, or... You're 12 years old, Hannah said firmly. Your job is to be 12. Help with chores, yes. Look after your brothers, absolutely. But you're not a ranch hand, Eli. Not yet. But I want to help, want to pull my weight. Hannah's heart ached at the worry in his voice, the premature responsibility that sat on his young shoulders like a too heavy coat. You are helping, just by being here, by being strong, by being you. That's enough, sweetheart. That's more than enough. In her own narrow bed that night, Hannah lay awake listening to the rain on the roof and the crackle of the fire in the stove. For the first time in weeks, her mind wasn't racing with desperate calculations, with scenarios of disaster, with the grinding fear of what would happen when the money ran out. They had a home. They had work. They had a chance. It was more than she'd had yesterday, more than she'd dared hope for when she'd stood in that dusty street in Willow Creek with her children and her shame. Thank you, she prayed silently. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Morning came cold and clear, the storm having blown itself out during the night. Hannah woke before dawn, dressed quickly, and made her way to the main house as the sky was just beginning to lighten in the east. She found Mrs. Abernathy already in the kitchen, mixing biscuit dough with practiced efficiency. Good morning, Hannah said. Put me to work. Mrs. Abernathy looked up with an approving smile. A woman after my own heart. All right then, let's start with coffee. The hands will be here soon, and they'll want it strong and hot. The morning passed in a blur of activity. Hannah learned where everything was kept, how much food to prepare, how the ranch ran. The hands came in for breakfast at 5:30 as promised. 5 weathered men who tipped their hats to her politely and ate with the single-minded focus of people who had a long day ahead of them. Dawson came in at 6, exchanged a few words with his foreman about the day's work, and ate his breakfast quickly and neatly. He nodded to Hannah as he left. Good biscuits, Mrs. Crawford. Better than Mrs. Abernathy's, though don't tell her I said so. I heard that, Mr. Baxter, Mrs. Abernathy called from the pantry, and Dawson's laugh floated back as the door closed behind him. After breakfast came the dishes, then the cleaning, then preparations for the midday meal. Mrs. Abernathy taught Hannah the routines, the preferences, the unspoken rules of running a ranch house. The older woman was patient but exacting, and Hannah found herself working harder than she had in years. It felt good. It felt purposeful. Around mid-morning, she went back to the cabin to check on her boys and found them awake but uncertain about what to do with themselves. Can we explore? Noah asked eagerly. Hannah hesitated. The ranch was safe, wasn't it? But there were horses, cattle, equipment. Stay away from the corrals and the barn unless Mr. Baxter says it's all right, she told them. And don't go far. Stay where I can see the cabin from the house. Yes, Mama, they chorused and tumbled outside into the weak winter sunshine. Hannah watched them go, feeling the old familiar tug of worry. But she couldn't keep them wrapped in cotton, couldn't protect them from every possible harm. They were boys. They needed to run, to explore, to be something other than refugees fleeing from one temporary haven to another. She returned to the main house and threw herself back into work. By the time the sun was high in the sky, Hannah had helped prepare and serve lunch, cleaned the dining room, and started on a mountain of laundry that Mrs. Abernathy had been putting off. Her back ached, her hands were red from hot water, and she was more tired than she'd been after the 30-mile wagon journey. But it was honest fatigue, earned fatigue, the kind that came from having a purpose and a place. You're a hard worker, Mrs. Abernathy observed, watching Hannah scrub at a stubborn stain in one of Dawson's work shirts. I can see why Mr. Baxter hired you on. I need this job, Hannah said simply. I can't afford to be anything less than my best. Still, some women would be resting by now, claiming delicate constitutions or some such. The older woman chuckled. Not you, though. You've got spine. I've got 3 sons who need feeding, Hannah corrected. That's what I've got. Mrs. Abernathy sobered. It's hard raising children alone. I was widowed myself 20 years back. My man was trampled by a spooked horse, left me with 2 girls to raise and no money to speak of. I know what it's like to scratch and scrape and wonder where the next meal's coming from. Hannah looked up in surprise. I'm sorry, I didn't know. No reason you should. But that's why I spoke up for you last night. I saw myself in you, that desperation, that determination. And I thought, this one's a fighter. This one won't give up. I can't give up, Hannah said quietly. I don't have that luxury. None of us do, dear. But some people fold anyway. You won't. Mrs. Abernathy patted her shoulder. Now, that's enough laundry for one day. Why don't you go check on those boys of yours? I'll start on supper preparations. Hannah found her sons down by the creek that ran along the edge of the ranch property. They'd discovered a fallen log and were using it as a bridge, taking turns walking across while the others shouted encouragement. Samuel teetered in the middle, arms spread wide, face split in a grin. Hannah's first instinct was to call out, to tell them to be careful, to come away from the water. But she stopped herself. They were laughing, playing, being children instead of solemn little adults weighted down with worry. When was the last time she'd heard them laugh like that? Mama, watch, Noah called, spotting her. He ran across the log with reckless confidence, jumped off the end, and landed in a crouch. Did you see? I saw. Very impressive. Hannah smiled despite her exhaustion. But it's getting cold. Come on back to the cabin and warm up. I'll make you something to eat. Can we come back tomorrow? Samuel asked as they walked. If your chores are done and Mr. Baxter says it's all right. I like it here, the little boy announced. It's better than Uncle Thomas's. Everywhere's better than Uncle Thomas's, Elijah muttered, and Hannah didn't correct him. That evening, after the hands had been fed and the kitchen cleaned, Dawson appeared at the cabin door. Hannah answered, wiping her hands on her apron, suddenly aware of how disheveled she must look. Mr. Baxter, is something wrong? No, nothing wrong. I wanted to see how your first day went. Fine. Good. Mrs. Abernathy has been very patient with me. Dawson nodded. She's good people. Been with me for 8 years now. I don't know what I'd do without her. He hesitated, then continued. I also wanted to talk to you about your boys. Hannah's stomach tightened. Have they been causing trouble? I told them to stay out of the way. No trouble, Dawson interrupted. The opposite, actually. My foreman mentioned that your oldest was watching the men work the horses this afternoon. Said the boy has a good eye, asks smart questions. Elijah wants to help, Hannah said carefully. But I told him he's too young for ranch work. He is, Dawson agreed, but that doesn't mean he can't learn. If you're amenable, I could have one of my hands teach him some basics, how to handle horses, men tack, that sort of thing. Nothing dangerous, just enough to keep him occupied and feeling useful. Hannah felt a rush of gratitude so intense it nearly brought tears to her eyes. That's very kind of you, Mr. Baxter. Dawson, he reminded her. And it's not kindness. A 12-year-old boy with nothing to do gets into mischief. Better to give him something productive. His expression softened. Besides, I know what it's like to grow up without a father. If I can help ease that burden a little, I will. Your father died when you were young? Died when I was 17. Old enough to take over the ranch, barely. But my uncles helped, taught me what I needed to know. Dawson's gaze drifted toward the darkening hills. Family's important, and when blood family won't step up, sometimes you have to make your own. Hannah understood he was talking about Thomas, about her rejection in Willow Creek. The kindness of it, the quiet understanding, made her chest tight. Thank you, she said softly, for all of this, for giving us a chance. You're earning your keep, Mrs. Crawford. No thanks necessary. He tipped his hat. Get some rest. Tomorrow'll come early. As the days turned into weeks, Hannah settled into the rhythm of ranch life. She rose before dawn, helped Mrs. Abernathy prepare breakfast, spent her days cooking and cleaning and managing the endless tasks that kept a household running. Her hands became calloused, her back grew stronger, and the constant knot of anxiety in her stomach began to loosen. The boys thrived. Elijah spent his afternoons learning from a patient ranch hand named Charlie, who taught him how to curry horses and clean stalls and repair bridles. Noah discovered a talent for collecting eggs from the chicken coop and feeding the ranch dogs. And Samuel, too young for chores, simply ran wild in the way small boys should, his laughter ringing across the yard. Hannah watched them transform, saw color return to their cheeks, saw them grow bold and confident instead of frightened and small. It was like watching plants that had been kept in the dark finally reach toward the sun. And slowly, cautiously, Hannah began to transform too. She learned the names of all the hands, Charlie, Miguel, Tom, Red, and a quiet young man named Jesse who blushed whenever she spoke to him. She learned which men liked their coffee strong and which preferred it with extra sugar. She learned how to cook for a crew of hungry cowboys, how to stretch supplies when provisions ran low, how to time the bread so it came out of the oven just as the men were sitting down to eat. Mrs. Abernathy became not just a teacher, but a friend, someone who understood the particular challenges of being a woman alone in this harsh country. They worked side by side, talking as they cooked, sharing stories of their past lives, their lost husbands, their hopes for the future. And Dawson Baxter became something Hannah couldn't quite define. He was her employer, certainly, but he was also unfailingly kind, asking after her boys, making sure they had what they needed, quietly arranging for Charlie to spend extra time with Elijah. He was courteous without being familiar, respectful without being distant. Hannah found herself noticing things about him. The way he spoke to his men with respect, never raising his voice but commanding absolute loyalty. The way he sat on the porch some evenings after supper, smoking his pipe and watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple. The way his rare smiles transformed his weathered face, making him look younger, less burdened. She noticed and told herself it didn't matter. He was her employer. She was his housekeeper. That was all. But one evening in late November, something shifted. Hannah was in the kitchen finishing the last of the supper dishes when Dawson came in through the back door. This was unusual. He normally spent his evenings in his study or out checking the stock. "Mrs. Crawford," he said, "do you have a moment?" Hannah dried her hands and turned to face him. "Of course. Is something wrong?" "No, nothing wrong. I wanted to—" He seemed uncharacteristically uncertain, his hat turning in his hands. "I learned something today about your background. Mrs. Abernathy mentioned you used to teach school." "I did, in Kansas, before I married." "How long did you teach?" 4 years. Why do you ask?" Dawson set his hat on the table and met her eyes directly. "The children on this ranch, the Hands kids and the families on the neighboring spreads, they don't have access to education. The nearest school is in Willow Creek, and that's too far for most to travel, especially in winter. I've been thinking about opening a small schoolhouse here on the ranch, just for the local children. But I'd need a teacher." Hannah's heart began to race. "You want me to teach?" "If you're willing. It wouldn't be every day, maybe 3 or 4 days a week, depending on how many students we get. You'd still help Mrs. Abernathy as needed, but teaching would become your primary responsibility. He paused. The pay would increase to $35 a month. Hannah stared at him, unable to speak. Teaching. Her teaching again. Doing something she loved, something that mattered, something more than just scrubbing floors and doing laundry. I don't know what to say, she whispered. Say yes, Dawson said with one of his rare smiles. Say you'll give these children a chance at education. God knows they need it. Yes. The word came out fierce and certain. Yes, absolutely yes. Good. Dawson picked up his hat. There's an old building near the south pasture. Used to be a bunkhouse before we built the new one. It needs some fixing up, but I think it could be made into a decent schoolroom. I'll have the men start working on it next week. Thank you, Mr. Baxter. Dawson, thank you so much. He nodded, but there was something in his expression, a warmth and approval, that made Hannah's cheeks flush. You're welcome. I have a feeling you're going to be an excellent teacher. After he left, Hannah stood alone in the kitchen, her hands trembling with excitement. A teacher again. A real position, a real purpose beyond mere survival. She wanted to laugh, to cry, to run and tell her boys. Instead, she pressed her hands to her chest and took a deep breath, letting the joy of it sink in. Thank you, she prayed again. Thank you for this man, for this chance, for this life we're building. The schoolhouse took shape over the following weeks. The men repaired the roof, installed new windows, built desks and benches from rough lumber. Hannah helped where she could and watched in amazement as the empty building transformed into a proper school. Dawson spread word to the neighboring ranches, and by the first week of December, Hannah had 8 students registered, ranging from 5 years old to 13, including her own boys. She spent her evenings preparing lessons, organizing supplies that Dawson had ordered from Denver, trying to remember everything she'd learned during her teaching years. On the first day of school, Hannah stood at the front of the classroom and looked at the faces turned toward her. Children hungry for knowledge, for stories, for a glimpse of the wider world beyond their isolated ranches. Good morning, she said, her voice steady and sure. My name is Mrs. Crawford, and I'm honored to be your teacher. We're going to learn many things together: reading, writing, arithmetic, history, geography. But most importantly, we're going to learn how to think, how to question, how to imagine. Because education isn't just about memorizing facts, it's about opening your mind to possibility. The children stared at her with varying degrees of interest and apprehension. Hannah smiled. Now then, let's begin. That evening, Dawson stopped by as she was closing up the schoolhouse. How did it go? He asked. Wonderfully. Challenging, but wonderful. Hannah couldn't keep the smile off her face. 2 of the children can barely read, and one of the older boys knows more mathematics than I do, but they're eager, Dawson. They want to learn. And you love teaching. It wasn't a question, but Hannah answered anyway. I do. I forgot how much I loved it. These past years, just trying to survive, I'd almost forgotten that I used to be someone who did things beyond cooking and cleaning. You're still that person, Dawson said quietly. You've always been that person. You just needed the opportunity to remember. Hannah looked at him, really looked at him, and saw understanding in his eyes. He knew what it was like to lose yourself in the struggle to survive. Knew what it was like to wonder if you'd ever be more than just someone getting through each day. Thank you, she said softly, for seeing that, for giving me this chance. You've earned it, Hannah. Every bit of it. It was the first time he'd called her by her first name, without the Mrs. in front of it. The intimacy of it sent a little shiver through her. They walked back toward the main house together as twilight settled over the ranch. The air was cold and crisp, promising snow before morning. Smoke rose from the chimneys and lamplight glowed warm in the windows. This must be a lot different from Kansas, Dawson said. It is. Kansas was flat, endless prairie. Here, you have the mountains, the hills. The land feels bigger somehow, more wild. Do you miss it, Kansas? Hannah considered. I miss what Kansas represented. Safety, stability, a life that made sense. She paused. But I don't miss the place itself, and I don't miss who I was there. Who were you there? Young, naive, I thought life was predictable, that if you followed the rules and worked hard, everything would turn out all right. Hannah's laugh was bitter. I learned differently. We all do eventually, Dawson said. Life has a way of teaching hard lessons. They'd reached the porch of the main house, but neither moved to go inside. Instead, they stood together in the gathering dark, breath misting in the cold air. What about you? Hannah asked. Have you always been a rancher? Born to it. My father built this place from nothing, and I inherited it when he died. For a while I thought about leaving, seeing what else was out there. But this land, he gestured at the darkening hills. It gets into your blood, becomes part of who you are. You've never wanted a different life? I had a different life once. The words came out quietly, weighted with old sorrow. Or at least, I thought I would. But things don't always work out the way you plan. Hannah sensed she was treading on painful ground, but curiosity drove her forward. What happened? Dawson was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, I was married once, long time ago. Her name was Sarah. The past tense told Hannah everything she needed to know. I'm sorry. It was 12 years ago. You'd think it wouldn't still hurt. Dawson's voice was rough. But some losses, they stay with you. How did she die? Childbirth. I was away, bringing cattle to market in Denver. By the time I got word and rode back, it was over. Lost both of them, Sarah and the baby. He turned his face away. I've asked myself 1,000 times what I could have done differently. If I'd been here, if I'd gotten the doctor sooner, if I'd... Don't, Hannah interrupted gently. Don't torture yourself with what-ifs. I've done that too with James. Wondered if there was some way I could have saved him, some sign I missed. But the truth is, sometimes death comes and there's nothing anyone can do to stop it. Dawson looked at her, and in the dim light she saw understanding pass between them. They were both survivors, both haunted by the ghosts of the spouses they'd lost. You're right, he said finally, but knowing that doesn't make it easier. No, it doesn't. They stood in companionable silence, two people who'd learned that life was hard and unfair and sometimes unbearably cruel. But they were still standing, still fighting, still finding reasons to keep going. Thank you for telling me, Hannah said. Thank you for listening. Dawson's expression softened. It's been a long time since I talked about Sarah. Most people around here either don't know or pretend they don't. Sometimes talking helps. Sometimes it doesn't. But either way, it's good to know you're not alone in your grief. No, Dawson agreed. We're not alone. As Hannah walked back to her cabin that night, she felt something stirring in her chest, something warm and cautious and still unnamed. It wasn't attraction, she told herself firmly. It was just gratitude, recognition, the natural bond between two people who'd survived similar losses. But as she lay in bed that night, she found herself thinking about the way Dawson had looked at her in the twilight, the way he'd shared his pain without hesitation, trusting her with the deepest wound of his heart. And she found herself wondering, dangerous, foolish wondering, what it might be like to not be alone anymore. The wondering didn't stop. If anything, it grew stronger as winter settled over the Circle B with earnest determination. Snow came in December, blanketing the ranch in white silence, transforming the harsh landscape into something almost magical. Hannah stood at her cabin window on those cold mornings, watching the sunrise over snow-covered hills, and felt something she hadn't felt in years, contentment tinged with possibility. The school thrived. Her students came bundled in coats and scarves, their faces red from the cold ride, but eager to learn. Hannah discovered that teaching fed something in her soul that had been starving. Each small victory, a struggling reader finally sounding out a whole sentence, a shy child raising their hand to answer a question, even her own Samuel proudly writing his name without help, felt like proof that she was more than just a survivor. She was building something, contributing something, mattering. And through it all, there was Dawson. He checked on the school regularly, always with some practical excuse, bringing more firewood, delivering new books he'd ordered from Denver, asking if the stove was heating properly. But Hannah noticed the way he'd linger, watching her teach with an expression she couldn't quite read. Once she'd looked up from helping a student and caught him smiling at something Samuel had said, and the warmth in his face had made her heart skip. "You're good with them," he'd said afterward as the children bundled up to head home. "Natural teacher." "They make it easy," Hannah replied. "Children want to learn. They're hungry for it. All you have to do is show them the way. Still, not everyone has the patience for it. Or the gift." Dawson had picked up one of the primers, thumbing through it. "My own education was spotty. Father needed me working more than he needed me reading. I can manage the basics, but anything beyond that..." He shrugged. "I regret that sometimes, wondering what I might have understood about the world if I'd had more schooling." "It's never too late to learn," Hannah had said impulsively. "If you wanted, I could..." She'd stopped, suddenly aware of how forward that sounded. But Dawson had looked at her with interest. "Could what?" "Nothing. It's presumptuous of me to..." "Hannah." His voice had been gentle but firm. "Say what you were going to say." "I was going to offer to lend you books, or if you wanted to improve your reading, I could help." The words had come out in a rush. "But you're a busy man, and I'm already employed by you, and it would be awkward." "I'd like that," Dawson had interrupted. "The books, I mean. And if you wouldn't mind occasionally talking about what I'm reading, I'd appreciate that too. Been a long time since I had someone to discuss ideas with." So began a new routine. Every week or so, Hannah would lend Dawson a book from the small collection she'd accumulated. And every Sunday evening, after supper was finished and the ranch had settled into its weekly rest, Dawson would come to the schoolhouse where Hannah would be preparing lessons for the week ahead. They'd talk about what he'd read, sometimes for just a few minutes, sometimes for an hour or more. Those conversations became the highlight of Hannah's week, though she tried not to examine too closely why that might be. One Sunday in January, Dawson arrived at the schoolhouse carrying a leather-bound volume Hannah didn't recognize. "Brought you something," he said, almost shyly. "Ordered it from Denver. Thought you might enjoy it." Hannah took the book with trembling hands. The leather was buttery soft, clearly expensive. She opened it to reveal gilt-edged pages and elegant typography. Tennyson, a complete collection of his poetry. "Dawson, I can't accept this," she whispered. "It's too much." "It's not too much. You've given my ranch something invaluable, education for the children, purpose for yourself, and..." He paused, seeming to struggle for words. "And you've reminded me what it's like to think about something beyond cattle and weather and profit margins. That's worth more than a book." Hannah ran her fingers over the embossed cover, overwhelmed. No one had given her something so thoughtful, so personal, in longer than she could remember. James had been many things, but attentive to her interests wasn't one of them. "Thank you," she managed. "I'll treasure it." "There's something else I wanted to ask you." Dawson removed his hat, turning it in his hands in that way he did when he was nervous. "I wanted to ask if it would be all right if I..." He stopped, frustrated with himself. Hannah's heart began to beat faster. "If you what?" "If I might court you," Dawson said finally, the words coming out in a rush. "When you're ready. If you're ever ready. I know it hasn't been long since your husband passed, and I'm not asking for an answer now. I just wanted you to know my intentions, so you can think about it. No pressure, no expectations. Just when you're ready." The world seemed to tilt sideways. Hannah stared at him, at this good man who'd given her shelter and employment and kindness, who was now standing before her with his heart in his hands, and she didn't know what to say. She struggled to form words. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything yet," Dawson said quickly. "Take your time. Think about it. I'm not going anywhere." "Why?" The question burst out before Hannah could stop it. "Why me? You could have anyone. Someone younger, someone without 3 children, someone who..." "I don't want anyone else," Dawson interrupted. "I want you. You're strong and capable and kind. You care about things that matter. You've been through hell and came out the other side still fighting. And when I'm around you, I feel..." He paused, searching for words. "I feel like myself again. Like the man I was before Sarah died. The man I thought I'd lost." Hannah's eyes burned with tears. "I'm broken, Dawson. I'm a widow with 3 sons and barely enough money to my name. I wake up some mornings and I'm so tired I can barely move. I have nightmares about James dying, about being turned away in Willow Creek, about losing my boys. I'm not some prize to be won. I'm not looking for a prize, Dawson said gently. I'm looking for a partner. Someone who understands what it's like to lose everything and have to rebuild. Someone who knows that life is hard but shows up anyway. He took a step closer. I'm broken too, Hannah. We're all broken in one way or another. Maybe that's what makes us fit. Hannah wiped at her eyes, hating that she was crying, hating the vulnerability of this moment. I need time. Take all the time you need, Dawson said. I'll be here. He left then, leaving Hannah alone with her racing thoughts and the beautiful book of poetry that suddenly felt heavy as stone. She wanted to say yes. That was the terrifying truth. Standing there in the quiet schoolhouse, she wanted to say yes to this man who'd shown her nothing but respect and kindness. But wanting felt dangerous. Wanting felt like tempting fate, like inviting disaster. James had died less than 3 months ago. 3 months. What kind of woman thought about courting when her husband was barely cold in his grave? But the practical part of Hannah's mind whispered that James had been dying long before cholera took him. Their marriage had been dying too, killed by disappointment and failed dreams, and the slow erosion of love under the weight of constant struggle. She'd mourned that loss years ago. The James who died outside Pueblo had been a ghost of the man she'd married. Was it wrong to want something more? Something better? Hannah didn't know. So she did what she always did when faced with impossible questions. She threw herself into work. January passed in a blur of teaching and cooking and cleaning. Hannah avoided being alone with Dawson when possible, keeping their interactions brief and professional. If he noticed, he didn't comment. He simply continued being himself, kind, steady, patient. The boys noticed, though. Elijah, especially. Mama, he said one evening as they sat by the fire in their cabin. Do you like Mr. Baxter? Hannah looked up from the sock she was darning. Of course I like him. He's a good employer. That's not what I mean. Elijah's 12-year-old face was far too serious. I mean, do you like him the way Pa liked you before you got married? Noah perked up from where he was playing with a carved wooden horse Charlie had made him. Is Mr. Baxter going to be our new Pa? No, Hannah said quickly, too quickly. Mr. Baxter is my employer, that's all. But he could be more, Elijah persisted. I see how he looks at you, and how you look at him when you think no one's watching. Hannah felt her cheeks flush. Elijah Crawford, that's enough. Mr. Baxter and I have a professional relationship, and that's how it's going to stay. Why? Elijah's voice rose with frustration. Pa's gone, Mama. He's been gone. And Mr. Baxter is nice, and he likes us, and he has this ranch, and we could stay here forever. And Elijah! Hannah's voice came out sharper than she intended. I said that's enough. This is not your concern. Her son's face closed off, hurt and anger warring in his expression. He stood abruptly. Fine, but don't pretend you're not interested in him just because you think that's what we want to hear. He stalked off to the bedroom, shutting the door harder than necessary. Hannah sat frozen, the sock forgotten in her lap. Out of the mouths of babes, she thought bitterly, her 12-year-old son had seen right through her. I like Mr. Baxter, Samuel offered into the silence. He taught me how to whistle. He gave me this horse, Noah added, and he lets us eat extra biscuits at breakfast. Hannah looked at her 2 younger sons, at their open, trusting faces, and felt something crack in her chest. They'd lost their father. They'd been rejected by family. They'd traveled 300 miles to an uncertain future. And now they were happy, settled, beginning to trust again. Did she have the right to risk that for her own wants? Did she have the right to potentially upend their lives again if a courtship with Dawson went wrong? But another voice whispered, did she have the right to deny them and herself the possibility of a real family? A father figure who clearly cared for them? A stable, permanent home? Hannah didn't know. She didn't know anything anymore except that she was tired of being afraid. February brought a cold snap that froze the water in the pump and made the trek to the schoolhouse treacherous. Hannah closed the school for a week, and the ranch settled into a kind of hibernation, everyone staying as close to the fires as possible. On one particularly brutal afternoon, Mrs. Abernathy came down with a fever. Hannah sent the older woman to bed immediately and took over all the household duties. By evening, she was exhausted and behind on everything. The hand's supper was late, the bread hadn't risen properly, and she'd burned a pot of beans beyond salvaging. She was on the verge of tears when Dawson walked into the kitchen. "Mrs. Abernathy's asking for more tea," he said, then stopped, taking in her frazzled appearance. "What's wrong?" "Everything," Hannah said, gesturing helplessly at the chaos around her. "I can't keep up. I've got laundry that needs hanging, bread that won't rise, burned beans, and I still need to prepare tomorrow's breakfast, and Mrs. Abernathy needs tending, and—" "Stop," Dawson said firmly. He crossed to her and gently took the spoon from her hand. "You're one person, Hannah. You can't do everything." "But it's my job. Your job is to help Mrs. Abernathy, not replace her entirely." He guided her to a chair. "Sit down before you fall down." "I can't sit. There's too much. The work will keep." Dawson poured her a cup of coffee and pressed it into her hands. "The men can eat sandwiches for supper. The laundry can wait. And I can make Mrs. Abernathy her tea." He paused. "When's the last time you ate?" Hannah tried to remember. "Breakfast, I think." "It's 7 o'clock at night, Hannah." Dawson's voice carried a hint of exasperation mixed with concern. "You can't take care of anyone if you don't take care of yourself." He moved around the kitchen with surprising efficiency, assembling bread and cheese and leftover ham. He made a plate and set it in front of her, then stood there with his arms crossed until she took a bite. The food hit her empty stomach like a benediction. Hannah hadn't realized how hungry she was until she started eating. Dawson watched her for a moment, nodded in satisfaction, then set about making tea for Mrs. Abernathy. "You don't have to do this," Hannah said around a mouthful of bread. "I can manage." "I know you can, but you don't have to." Dawson glanced at her over his shoulder. "One thing I've learned about you, Hannah Crawford, you're so busy being strong for everyone else that you forget to let anyone be strong for you." The words hit harder than they should have. Hannah set down her sandwich, suddenly unable to swallow past the lump in her throat. "I don't know how to do that," she whispered. "Let someone else be strong. James never—" "He wasn't—" She trailed off, unable to find the words. "He wasn't steady," Dawson finished quietly. "I gathered as much. And so you had to be steady for both of you, for all of you." "Someone had to be." "Yes, but that someone doesn't always have to be you anymore." Dawson poured hot water over the tea leaves, watching them unfurl. "You're not alone here, Hannah. Not if you don't want to be." Hannah looked at him, really looked at him. At this man who'd taken in a desperate widow and her children without hesitation, who'd given her meaningful work instead of just charity, who'd offered courtship and then backed away when she needed space, who was now making tea and insisting she eat and seeing right through her walls to the exhausted, frightened woman underneath. "I'm scared," she heard herself say, "of wanting too much, of letting myself hope. Every time I've done that, it's ended badly." Dawson brought Mrs. Abernathy's tea to the table and sat down across from Hannah. His gray-blue eyes were steady and kind. "I can't promise that hoping won't hurt sometimes. Life's too unpredictable for promises like that. But I can promise that whatever you decide about us, about courting or not courting, you'll always have a place here, you and your boys. That doesn't change." "Why?" Hannah asked, echoing her question from weeks before. "Why are you so good to us?" "Because you deserve goodness," Dawson said simply. "Because your boys deserve a chance to be children instead of refugees. Because when I look at you, I see someone worth knowing, worth respecting, worth—" He paused, then continued quietly. "Worth caring for." Hannah's breath caught. The kitchen suddenly felt too warm, too small, too charged with things unsaid. "Dawson, you don't have to say anything," he interrupted gently. "Just think about it, and in the meantime, finish your supper. I'll take this tea up to Mrs. Abernathy and let the men know supper's going to be simple tonight." After he left, Hannah sat alone in the kitchen, her half-eaten sandwich growing cold, and felt the last of her resistance beginning to crumble. She was tired of being alone, tired of being strong, tired of pretending she didn't feel something stirring in her heart when Dawson looked at her like she mattered. Maybe, she thought, maybe it would be all right to hope again. Mrs. Abernathy's fever broke after 3 days, but she remained weak. Hannah continued managing the bulk of the household work, though Dawson made sure she wasn't overwhelmed again. He enlisted some of the hands to help with heavy chores, and he himself took over several tasks that normally fell to the housekeeper. The enforced closeness meant Hannah and Dawson saw each other constantly, working side by side in the kitchen, passing in hallways, coordinating meals and schedules. And slowly, gradually, Hannah felt her guard lowering. She found herself laughing at his dry observations about ranch life, found herself looking forward to the moment each day when he'd stop by the kitchen for his evening coffee, found herself noticing small details about him, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the gentleness of his hands when he examined a horse's injury, the patience he showed with her boys. One evening in late February, as they worked together cleaning up after supper, their hands brushed over a dish towel. It was nothing, an accident, but they both froze. The air between them seemed to thicken. "Hannah," Dawson said softly, "I need to know. Is there any chance you might say yes to my courting you, or am I hoping for something that will never happen?" Hannah met his eyes and saw vulnerability there, saw the risk he was taking by asking. This strong, capable man was putting his heart in her hands, trusting her not to crush it. "There's a chance," she whispered. "But Dawson, I'm not ready yet. It's only been 4 months since James died, and people will talk, and I'm still figuring out who I am without him, and—" "I'll wait," Dawson interrupted. "However long it takes, I'll wait. What if I'm never ready? What if I can't get past my fear? Then I'll accept that." His hand covered hers where it rested on the counter. "But I don't think that's going to happen. I think you're braver than you give yourself credit for." Hannah turned her hand over, letting their fingers intertwine. It was the first truly intimate touch they'd shared, and it sent warmth flooding through her. "I don't feel brave. I feel terrified." "Brave people are always terrified," Dawson said. "They just do the thing anyway." They stood there for a long moment, hands clasped, neither quite ready to let go. Then Samuel's voice carried from the sitting room where the boys were playing, and Hannah reluctantly pulled away. "I should go check on them," she said. "Of course." But Dawson's eyes held hers for a beat longer. "Thank you for the chance, Hannah. That's all I need." March arrived with false promises of spring. The snow melted enough to make everything muddy, then froze again at night, creating treacherous conditions. Hannah reopened the school, grateful to return to teaching, but the unpredictable weather meant attendance was spotty. On the first Sunday in March, she and Dawson fell into their routine of meeting in the schoolhouse to discuss books. They'd been reading a collection of essays about westward expansion, and the conversation had ranged from history to philosophy to personal experience. "Do you ever regret coming west?" Dawson asked as they sat in the lamplight, the rest of the ranch quiet around them. Hannah considered. "I regret some of what happened because of it. But coming west itself? No. Kansas was safe, but it was also suffocating. There was only one acceptable path for someone like me: marry young, have children, keep house, grow old. I wanted to see if there was more." "Did you find it?" "I found hardship," Hannah said honestly. "But I also found strength I didn't know I had. Found out I could survive things I thought would break me. So yes, I suppose I found more. Just not the more I was expecting." "That's the thing about the frontier," Dawson mused. "It either breaks you or makes you into someone new, sometimes both." He set down his cup. "When I lost Sarah, I thought I was broken beyond repair. Spent years just going through the motions, running the ranch because it was there to run, but not caring much about anything. Then you showed up with your boys, all fierce determination and barely hidden fear, and something in me woke up." Hannah's heart hammered. "Dawson, I'm not saying this to pressure you," he continued. "I'm saying it because I want you to know what you've given me. Hope. Purpose beyond just surviving. The possibility that maybe life isn't finished with me yet. That maybe there's still joy to be found." Hannah set her own cup down with shaking hands. The words she'd been holding back for weeks, maybe months, suddenly demanded to be spoken. "I feel it too, that possibility. And it terrifies me because I don't know if I can survive losing someone else I care about." "You care about me?" Dawson's voice was soft with wonder. "Yes," Hannah admitted. "God help me. Yes, I care about you." Dawson reached across the small space between them and took her hand. Then that's enough for now. We'll figure out the rest as we go. They sat like that, hands clasped, neither speaking, as the lamp burned low and the night deepened around them. It wasn't a declaration of love or a promise of forever, but it was honest, and it was real, and it was theirs. The week after that conversation, influenza came to the Circle B. It started with Jesse, the young ranch hand, who came down with fever and chills. Within 2 days, 3 more of the hands were sick. Mrs. Abernathy moved the ill men into the bunkhouse and began nursing them with grim determination. But the disease was vicious. Hannah helped where she could, bringing soup and fresh water, changing sheets, monitoring fevers. She kept the school closed and kept her boys away from the main house, terrified the sickness would spread to them. For 5 days, it seemed like they might keep it contained. Then Dawson didn't show up for breakfast. Hannah found him in his room, burning with fever, his eyes glassy with delirium. Her stomach dropped to her feet. "No," she whispered. "Not you. Please, not you." "Hannah?" His voice was rough, confused. "What are you doing here?" "You're sick." She pressed her hand to his forehead and felt the heat radiating from him. "I'm going to take care of you." "No, the boys can't risk." "The boys are fine. They're with Charlie in the foreman's house. He'll look after them." Hannah was already moving, pulling blankets, finding water, falling back on instincts she'd learned caring for James and half a dozen other people who'd fallen ill on their westward journey. "Now stop arguing and let me help you." What followed were 3 of the longest days of Hannah's life. Dawson's fever climbed dangerously high. He thrashed and muttered, caught in delirium, sometimes lucid enough to recognize her and sometimes lost in memories she couldn't reach. Hannah stayed by his side through all of it, bathing his face with cool cloths, coaxing water past his cracked lips, monitoring his breathing. Mrs. Abernathy tried to spell her, but Hannah refused to leave. "You need rest," the older woman insisted on the second night. "I can't," Hannah said simply. "I can't leave him." Mrs. Abernathy looked at her with knowing eyes. "You love him." Hannah opened her mouth to deny it, then stopped. When had denial become impossible? When had Dawson Baxter become so essential to her that the thought of losing him made her chest feel like it was caving in? "I think I might," she whispered. "God help me. I think I do." "Then stay," Mrs. Abernathy said gently. "But don't forget to take care of yourself, too. Won't do him any good if you collapse." On the 3rd night, Dawson's fever broke. Hannah was dozing in the chair beside his bed when she heard him whisper, "Sarah, Sarah, is that you?" Her eyes flew open. Dawson was staring at the ceiling, tears tracking down his face, his hand reaching for something, someone who wasn't there. "I'm sorry," he mumbled. "So sorry. Should have been here. Should have saved you. My fault. All my fault." Hannah's heart broke for him, for the guilt he'd been carrying all these years. She took his reaching hand and held it tight. "It wasn't your fault," she said firmly, even though she knew he wasn't really hearing her. "You couldn't have known. You couldn't have stopped it." "Should have been there," Dawson insisted, his voice breaking. "She needed me and I wasn't there. Failed her. Failed our baby." "You didn't fail anyone." Hannah brought his hand to her cheek. "Sometimes death comes, and there's nothing anyone can do. You're not responsible for losing her, Dawson. You're only responsible for how you lived after." Dawson's fevered eyes found her face, and for a moment she thought he truly saw her. "Hannah?" "Yes, I'm here. I'm right here." "Don't leave," he whispered. "Please don't leave." "I won't," Hannah promised. "I'm not going anywhere." He subsided then, his breathing evening out, and Hannah sat holding his hand through the rest of that long night. And somewhere in those dark hours, she made a decision. She was done being afraid, done letting fear dictate her choices. Life was too short and too uncertain to waste time pretending she didn't want things, didn't need things, didn't love. Because she did love Dawson Baxter, loved his quiet strength, his patient kindness, the way he'd given her family a home without asking anything in return. Loved how he made her feel capable and seen and worthy. Loved the man he was, and the man he helped her remember she could be. She loved him, and when he woke up, because he would wake up, she refused to consider any other possibility. She was going to tell him so. By morning, Dawson's fever had broken completely. He woke weak but clear-eyed, taking in his surroundings with obvious confusion. "How long?" he rasped. 3 days, Hannah said, relief making her dizzy. "You've been sick for 3 days. The others?" "Recovering. Jesse's already back on his feet, and the others are improving." Hannah helped him sit up enough to sip some water. "You scared me half to death, Dawson Baxter." "Sorry." He managed a weak smile. "Didn't do it on purpose." "I should hope not." Hannah set the cup aside, suddenly shy now that he was awake and present, and looking at her with those clear gray-blue eyes. "You said some things while you were fevered." Dawson's expression shuddered. "I don't remember much. What did I say?" "You talked about Sarah, about feeling guilty that you weren't here when she died." He closed his eyes. "I see. You're not responsible for her death," Hannah said firmly. "I know you feel like you are, but you're not. You couldn't have known, couldn't have changed what happened. You don't know that. I do know that blaming yourself won't bring her back, won't change anything except to poison the years you have left." Hannah took his hand, not caring any more about propriety or fear. "I understand guilt, Dawson. I spent months after James died wondering if I could have done something different. Given him better care, found a doctor sooner, forced him to rest instead of pushing on. But the truth is, sometimes people die and there's no one to blame. It just happens." Dawson looked at their joined hands, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "How did you let go of the guilt?" "I haven't entirely," Hannah admitted, "but I realized that carrying it wasn't honoring James's memory. It was just making me miserable. And I had 3 sons who needed me present, not lost in what-ifs. So I chose to focus on living instead of on what I couldn't change." "Living," Dawson repeated quietly. "I'm not sure I remember how." "Then we'll figure it out together." Hannah squeezed his hand. "Because I meant what I said the other night. I care about you, more than I thought possible. And watching you nearly die made me realize something." "What's that?" "That I'm tired of being afraid, tired of holding back, tired of pretending I don't want things I want." She took a shaky breath. "So yes, Dawson, my answer is yes. You can court me, if the offer still stands." Dawson stared at her like she'd just told him the sun had risen in the west. "You mean it?" "I mean it. Even though I'm a broken widower with a pile of guilt and a ranch that demands everything I have." "Even though," Hannah confirmed, "because you're also kind and patient and good with my boys, because you make me feel like I matter, like I'm more than just someone struggling to survive." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Because when I thought I might lose you, it felt like losing air." Dawson lifted their joined hands and pressed a kiss to her knuckles, his eyes never leaving hers. "I promise you, Hannah Crawford, I will do everything in my power to be worthy of that." "You already are," Hannah said. "You have been from the start. I was just too scared to see it." "And now?" "Now I'm still scared," she admitted, "but I'm choosing hope anyway, choosing to believe that maybe we've both earned a second chance at happiness." Dawson pulled her closer, until she was perched on the edge of his bed, their faces inches apart. "Then let's take that chance together. Build something new from all our broken pieces." "Together," Hannah agreed, and when he kissed her, soft and gentle and full of promise, she felt something inside her finally, truly begin to heal. The kiss lingered in Hannah's mind for days afterward, gentle as it had been. She'd returned to her cabin that morning with her heart full of equal parts terror and joy, unsure which would win out. But when she'd told her boys, carefully, watching their faces for any sign of distress, that Mr. Baxter had asked permission to court her and she'd said yes, their reactions had swept away any lingering doubt. Samuel had whooped and thrown his arms around her waist. Noah had grinned so wide she thought his face might split. And Elijah, her serious eldest who carried too much on his young shoulders, had simply nodded and said, "Good. He makes you smile, Mama. We like it when you smile." That had undone her completely. She'd gathered all 3 of them close and let herself cry. Not from sorrow this time, but from relief and gratitude and the overwhelming realization that they were going to be all right. More than all right. They were going to be happy. The ranch hands recovered from the influenza one by one, returning to their duties with the sheepish gratitude of men who'd been well cared for. Dawson regained his strength more slowly, chafing at the forced rest, but obeying Mrs. Abernathy's stern orders to take it easy. Hannah brought him books and sat with him in the evenings, talking about everything and nothing, learning the rhythms of each other's thoughts. She learned that he'd lost his mother when he was 8, taken by pneumonia during a brutal winter, that his father had been a hard man, demanding but fair, who'd built the Circle B from nothing and expected his son to do the same. That Dawson had loved Sarah with the intense, all-consuming passion of a young man who'd never known real loss, and her death had shattered something fundamental in him. "I stopped believing good things could last," he told her one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sun paint the mountains purple and gold. Sarah and the baby dying like that. It felt like punishment for being too happy, like I'd been foolish to think I deserved joy. Hannah understood that bone deep. After James died, I felt the same way. Every good moment felt borrowed, like it would be snatched away the moment I started to trust it. "Do you still feel that way?" Hannah considered, watching her boys play in the yard below. Samuel was chasing chickens while Noah tried to teach him to throw a rope the way Charlie had shown him. Elijah sat on the corral fence, one of Dawson's ranch cats in his lap, looking more at peace than she'd seen him in months. "Sometimes," she admitted, "but less than I did. Being here, having purpose, watching my boys thrive, it's teaching me that good things can last if you tend them carefully." "Like a garden," Dawson mused. "Exactly like a garden. You plant seeds, water them, pull the weeds, protect them from frost. And if you're diligent and lucky, you get something beautiful." She glanced at him. "We're planting something, aren't we? You and me?" "I hope so." Dawson reached for her hand, a gesture that was becoming natural between them. "I want to do this right, Hannah. Court you properly. Show you that you can trust me with your heart." "You've already shown me that," Hannah said softly. "From the moment you invited us into your home during that storm, you've been showing me. Still, there's a difference between offering shelter to someone in need and this. What we're building. I want you to be sure, want your boys to be sure, want there to be no doubt that when this becomes something permanent, it's because we all chose it freely." The "when" sent warmth flooding through Hannah's chest. He saw a future with them. Not just a possibility, but a certainty. "Then court me properly," she said, squeezing his hand. "I'd like that." So Dawson courted her with the patient thoroughness he brought to everything. He left wildflowers on the schoolhouse steps when they started blooming in early April. He carved a wooden doll for Samuel and found a book on horsemanship for Elijah. He helped Noah build a fort in the barn loft, sacrificing a Saturday afternoon to hammer boards and brace posts while the boy chattered excitedly about his plans. He took Hannah on walks around the ranch, showing her the land he loved, explaining the rhythms of cattle and seasons and weather. They rode out to the high meadow one Sunday afternoon, just the two of them, and sat on a rocky outcropping watching the ranch spread out below like a kingdom. "This land gets in your blood," Dawson said. "My father always said that once you've ranched in Colorado, nowhere else feels like home. You start to need the mountains like you need air." "I'm beginning to understand that," Hannah replied. She'd been watching an eagle circle lazily overhead, but now she turned to look at Dawson. "When I first came here, everything felt foreign. The altitude, the dryness, the way the weather changes in minutes. But now I can't imagine being anywhere else." "Because of the land, or because of what the land represents?" Hannah smiled. "Both. The land is beautiful, harsh, demanding. It requires everything you have, but it also gives back in ways I never expected. Purpose, community, a place to belong." "And me?" Dawson asked quietly. "Do I factor into that feeling?" "You know you do." Hannah felt her cheeks warm. Even after weeks of courtship, intimacy still made her shy. "You're the reason all of this is possible. Without you..." "You would have found another way," Dawson interrupted. "You're too stubborn and too strong to do otherwise. But I'm glad you didn't have to. Glad you're here with me instead of somewhere else, struggling alone." He leaned in then and kissed her, slow and sweet. and Hannah felt the last of her reservations crumble. This was right. This man, this land, this life they were building together, it was all undeniably, perfectly right. When they returned to the ranch that evening, they found Mrs. Abernathy waiting with a knowing smile and a pot roast that filled the house with mouth-watering smells. The boys were already seated at the table, faces scrubbed clean, manners on display. "They insisted on waiting for you," Mrs. Abernathy said, her eyes twinkling. "Said it wouldn't be proper to eat without everyone present." Hannah felt a swell of love for her sons, for their attempts to be grown up and proper, to show Dawson they could be a real family. Over supper, conversation flowed easily. Samuel told an elaborate story about the chicken that had pecked his hand. Noah demonstrated the rope trick Charlie had finally helped him master. Elijah asked intelligent questions about the spring roundup that was approaching. And Dawson answered each question with patience and interest, drawing the boys out, making them laugh, treating them like they mattered. Hannah watched it all with her heart so full she thought it might burst. This, she thought, this is what family is supposed to feel like. After the boys were in bed that night, Hannah and Dawson sat on her cabin's small porch, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. The air was cool but not cold, carrying the promise of true spring. "I've been thinking," Dawson said, "about what comes next, for us." Hannah's pulse quickened. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I want to marry you, Hannah. Not today, not tomorrow, but soon. When you're ready. When we're both sure." He turned to face her fully. "I know it's only been a few months since James died. I know people might talk, might say it's too soon or improper. But I also know what I feel, and I know what I see when I look at you and your boys. I see my future. I see home." Hannah's eyes burned with tears. "I see that too. But Dawson, you need to understand something. I loved James once, at the beginning, but our marriage became something else over the years. He was a dreamer who never learned to deal with reality, and I became the anchor that kept us from floating away completely. It was exhausting, and by the end, I think we were both just going through the motions, staying together because of the boys, and because we didn't know how to do anything else." "I'm not James," Dawson said. "I know, that's what makes this scary. With James, I always knew where I stood, on shaky ground, constantly bracing for the next disaster. With you, I feel solid, secure, and part of me keeps waiting for that to crumble because I don't know how to trust solid ground anymore." Dawson took both her hands in his. "Then we'll learn together. I'll show you every day that this is real, that I'm not going anywhere, that you can trust this. Trust us." He paused, then added quietly, "I told you about Sarah, how losing her broke something in me, but I didn't tell you everything." Hannah waited, sensing he needed to share something difficult. "After she died, I blamed myself for years, but I also blamed her, which is worse." Dawson's voice was rough with old shame. "I was angry that she'd gotten pregnant, angry that she hadn't waited for me to get back before the baby came, angry that she'd left me alone. It was irrational and cruel and not her fault at all, but I felt it anyway. And that anger, that blame, it poisoned everything, made it impossible to grieve properly, to remember her with love instead of resentment." "What changed?" Hannah asked softly. "Time. And therapy of a sort. Father Murphy over in Silverton, he helped me work through it. Made me see that I was really angry at God, at fate, at the unfairness of it all. Sarah was just the easiest target." Dawson looked at Hannah with raw honesty. "I'm telling you this because I want you to know I understand complicated grief. Understand feeling guilty and angry and relieved all at once. Whatever you felt about James at the end, whatever you're feeling now about moving forward, it's all valid, all acceptable." Hannah felt something break open in her chest, a truth she'd been holding back even from herself. "I was relieved when he died," she whispered. "Not glad, but relieved, because it meant the struggle was over. No more watching him fail at another scheme, no more scraping by on false promises, no more pretending I believed in dreams I knew would never come true. I was relieved, and then I felt like a monster for feeling that way." "You're not a monster. You're human." Dawson squeezed her hands. "And you're free now. Free to build a life that isn't based on someone else's broken dreams. A life with you, Hannah said, testing the words. A life with me, if you want it. I do want it. The certainty in her voice surprised even herself. I'm still scared, still learning to trust solid ground. But I want this. Want you. Want the life we could build together. Dawson smiled then, wide and genuine, and Hannah realized she'd rarely seen him smile like that, unguarded and full of joy. Then let's build it. One day at a time, one choice at a time. No rush, no pressure, just together. Together, Hannah agreed, and sealed the promise with a kiss that tasted like hope and healing and home. The weeks that followed were some of the happiest of Hannah's life. Spring came in earnest, transforming the ranch into a riot of wildflowers and new grass. The cattle grew fat on good grazing. The school buzzed with children excited about warm weather and summer ahead, and Hannah found herself falling more deeply in love with each passing day. She loved watching Dawson work, the competent way he handled horses and men, and the 1,000 problems that arose on a working ranch. She loved his dry humor, the way he could make her laugh with a single raised eyebrow or wry comment. She loved how he was with her boys, firm but fair, teaching them skills and values without ever trying to replace their father's memory. And Dawson made no secret of his feelings for her. He told anyone who'd listen that he was courting Mrs. Crawford with serious intent. When they made the monthly trip to Willow Creek for supplies, he introduced her to shopkeepers and ranchers as the woman I'm going to marry, his pride evident. Hannah blushed at the boldness of it, but couldn't deny the thrill that ran through her each time. Thomas Crawford saw them together at the general store one afternoon. Her brother-in-law had the grace to look ashamed as Dawson helped Hannah load supplies into the wagon, his hand resting casually at the small of her back. "Hannah," Thomas said, approaching hesitantly, "could we speak a moment?" Hannah glanced at Dawson, who nodded and moved away to give them privacy, though his watchful gaze never left her. "What is it, Thomas?" "I wanted to say, I'm glad things worked out for you, that you found a good situation." Thomas twisted his hat in his hands. "I heard Baxter's courting you. That true?" "It is." That's good. He's a decent man. Does well for himself." Thomas paused, then added quietly, "I'm sorry, Hannah, for how I treated you when you first came. Martha's been after me about it for months, saying I should have helped more. She was right." Hannah studied her brother-in-law's face, seeing genuine remorse there. Part of her wanted to hold on to her anger, to make him feel the rejection she'd felt. But anger was exhausting, and she had better things to do with her energy. "You gave me money when I needed it," she said finally. "That helped more than you know. And if you hadn't turned me away, I wouldn't have gone to the Circle B. Wouldn't have found Dawson. So maybe things worked out the way they were supposed to." "That's generous of you." "It's not generosity, it's just letting go." Hannah glanced at Dawson, who was examining harnesses with the deliberate focus of someone pretending not to eavesdrop. "I'm building a new life, Thomas. One that doesn't have room for old grudges. So I forgive you, if that's what you're asking for. And I wish you and your family well." Thomas's relief was palpable. "Thank you. And Hannah, James would be glad you found someone good, for what that's worth." Hannah nodded, not trusting her voice, and Thomas tipped his hat and walked away. Dawson returned immediately, his eyes searching her face. "You all right?" "I am." And she was. The encounter that would have devastated her months ago now felt like closing a chapter, not reopening a wound. "Let's go home." "Home," Dawson repeated, smiling. "I like the sound of that." As they rode back to the ranch, Hannah reflected on how much had changed since that desperate day when she'd stood in Willow Creek with nowhere to go. She'd been so lost then, so frightened. Now she knew exactly where she belonged. One evening in late May, Dawson asked Hannah to join him in the ranch office after supper. She found him standing by the window, looking out at the land painted gold by the setting sun. "You wanted to see me?" she asked. "I did." Dawson turned, and Hannah saw something in his expression that made her pulse quicken. Nervousness, excitement, determination all mixed together. "I have something for you and your boys, actually." He handed her a folder of official-looking documents. Hannah opened it, scanning the legal language, trying to make sense of what she was reading. "These are deeds," she said slowly. "For land?" "For 40 acres on the eastern edge of the ranch," Dawson confirmed. "It's good land with water access and timber. I had my lawyer draw up the papers to put it in your name, yours and your son's." Hannah stared at him, unable to process what he was saying. "I don't understand. Why would you—" "Because I want you to have security," Dawson said. "Independent of me, independent of our relationship. If something happened to me, if things didn't work out between us, if you ever needed to leave, you'd have land of your own. Property no one could take from you. Your boys would have an inheritance." "But Dawson, this is too much." "It's not enough," he interrupted. "Hannah, you came here with nothing. You've worked hard, built a life, earned every bit of respect you have. But I need you to know that you're not dependent on my goodwill or our relationship working out. You're an independent woman with property and rights. Whatever you choose to do, stay with me, marry me, leave, you're choosing it freely, not because you have no other options." Hannah felt tears streaming down her face. The generosity of it, the thoughtfulness, the sheer rightness of understanding what she needed most, security, independence, the knowledge that she'd never be desperate again, overwhelmed her completely. "How?" she whispered. "How did you know this was what I needed?" "Because I know you," Dawson said simply. "Know that your worst fear is being helpless again, being at someone else's mercy. This way, you'll never have to be." He crossed to her, gently wiping away her tears. "Say you'll accept it, please." "I accept it," Hannah said through her tears. "Thank you doesn't seem like enough. But thank you for understanding, for seeing me so clearly." "I see you," Dawson agreed. "All of you. The strength and the fear, the pride and the vulnerability, and I love all of it, Hannah. I love you." It was the first time he'd said those words. Hannah felt them settle into her chest like warmth, like sunlight, like coming home after a long journey. "I love you too," she whispered. "I think I have for a while now. I was just too scared to say it." Dawson kissed her then, deep and thorough, and Hannah kissed him back with all the love and gratitude and hope she'd been holding inside. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Dawson rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said, "not someday. Not when you're ready, now, soon. Let's start building our future for real." "Yes," Hannah said without hesitation. "Yes, I'll marry you." They decided on a Christmas wedding, giving Hannah time to feel settled in her decision and allowing the boys to fully adjust to the idea of Dawson becoming their stepfather. The announcement delighted everyone. Mrs. Abernathy immediately began planning the celebration. The ranch hands congratulated Dawson with knowing grins, and the children at school peppered Hannah with excited questions about the wedding. Her boys took the news with varying reactions. Samuel was thrilled at the prospect of Dawson officially becoming his father. Noah worried about practical details like where they'd live and whether he'd have to change his name. And Elijah, after digesting the information quietly for a day, sought Hannah out for a private conversation. "Mama, he said, his young face serious, "are you happy? Really happy?" Hannah pulled her eldest son into a hug. "I am, sweetheart, happier than I've been in years. And Mr. Baxter, Dawson, he's good to you. Not like—" Elijah trailed off, unwilling to criticize his late father, but clearly needing reassurance. "He's very good to me," Hannah said firmly. "He listens when I talk. He respects my opinions. He never makes me feel small or foolish. And Eli, he'll never try to replace your father. He knows James was your pa, and he respects that. He just wants to be someone you can count on." "I like him," Elijah admitted. "He teaches me things and doesn't get mad when I ask too many questions. And he makes you smile the way you used to before Pa got sick." "Then you approve?" "I approve." Elijah managed a small smile. "We're going to be a real family, aren't we? Not just people living in the same place, but a real family." "We already are a real family," Hannah said. "The wedding just makes it official." As summer rolled into fall, Hannah threw herself into preparations. She sewed a new dress with Mrs. Abernathy's help, simple but elegant in deep blue wool. She taught her boys how to tie proper neckties and stand still during fittings for their new suits. She worked with the ranch cook to plan a feast that would feed the neighboring families they'd invited to celebrate. And through it all, Dawson was a steady, loving presence. He didn't disappear into wedding planning stress or try to control every detail. Instead, he supported Hannah's choices, offered opinions when asked, and made sure she knew that the wedding was just one day. What mattered was the life they'd build afterward. One crisp October evening, as they sat together on the porch, watching the aspen trees turn gold in the hills, Dawson pulled a small box from his pocket. "I have something else for you," he said. "Been waiting for the right moment." Hannah opened the box to find a delicate silver locket on a fine chain. She lifted it out, admiring the intricate engraving on the front, and opened the clasp. Inside were 3 small photographs. Her 3 sons, their faces captured perfectly, looking happy and healthy and loved. "The traveling photographer came through last month," Dawson explained. "I commissioned portraits of the boys as a surprise, but look at the other side." Hannah turned the locket over. The opposite interior was empty, ready for another photograph. "That's for whatever the future holds," Dawson said softly. "Maybe a picture of us together, maybe another child someday, if we're blessed with one. Maybe just a reminder of something important. But I wanted you to have it, your boys with you always, close to your heart, with room for more love to come." Hannah couldn't speak past the lump in her throat. The thoughtfulness of it, the way he'd included her sons while also acknowledging the possibility of a shared future, undid her completely. She fastened the locket around her neck, feeling the slight weight of it settle against her chest. "It's perfect," she whispered. "You're perfect." "I'm not perfect," Dawson said with a laugh. "I'm stubborn and set in my ways, and I spend too much time worrying about cattle prices. But I'm perfect for you, maybe. And you're perfect for me. That's what matters." "Perfect for each other," Hannah agreed. She leaned against him, his arm coming around her shoulders, and they sat in comfortable silence as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and pink. This was home, Hannah thought. Not the ranch, not the cabin, not any physical place. Home was this feeling of being seen and valued and loved, of building something meaningful with someone who understood both her strength and her scars, of knowing that whatever came next, she wouldn't face it alone. "Tell me about Christmas," she said after a while. "What traditions does the ranch have?" "Not many," Dawson admitted. "It's usually just a quiet day. Mrs. Abernathy makes a special dinner, the hands get the day off, and I usually spend it thinking about Sarah and feeling melancholy." He paused. "But this year will be different. This year we'll have a wedding, a celebration, new traditions to start." "I want it to be special for the boys, too," Hannah said. "They've had such a hard year. They deserve joy and celebration and hope. Then we'll make sure they have it." Dawson pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "We'll make this a Christmas none of us will ever forget." As October faded into November, the ranch settled into the rhythm of preparing for winter. Cattle were brought closer to the home pastures. Firewood was stacked high against the coming cold. The school closed for a week so families could focus on preparations, and Hannah used the time to finalize wedding plans and help Mrs. Abernathy with preserving and canning. The boys grew more excited as the wedding approached. Samuel talked about it constantly, asking questions about the ceremony and the party and whether there would be cake. Noah helped Dawson with extra chores, determined to prove he could be useful. And Elijah, in a gesture that made Hannah's eyes well up, asked if he could give her away at the wedding. "Pa would want me to," he said seriously, "since he can't be here to do it himself." "I think that's exactly what he'd want," Hannah agreed, pulling her son close. "I'd be honored to have you give me away." The first snow came in mid-November, a gentle dusting that made everything look clean and new. Hannah stood at the schoolhouse window watching it fall, thinking about all the snow that had fallen since she'd arrived at the Circle B, how each storm had seemed to mark a turning point in her journey, the storm that had driven her to seek shelter here in the first place, the winter cold that had brought her and Dawson closer, the illness that had forced her to confront her feelings, and now this snow, beautiful and peaceful, marking the approach of her wedding day. "Miss Crawford," one of her students tugged at her skirt, "are you going to be Mrs. Baxter after Christmas?" Hannah smiled down at the little girl. "I am." Will you still be our teacher? Of course. Getting married doesn't change that. Good, the child said with obvious relief. We like having you as our teacher. You make learning fun. After the children left for the day, Hannah tidied the schoolhouse and reflected on how much her life had changed. A year ago, she'd been struggling to survive, watching her husband die, facing an uncertain future with 3 frightened children. Now she had a home, a purpose, a man who loved her, and the promise of a future that felt solid and real. She touched the locket at her throat, feeling the outline of her son's faces through the silver. Whatever came next, they'd face it together. Her boys, Dawson, and the family they were choosing to become. As she walked back to the main house through the gently falling snow, Hannah saw Dawson on the porch waiting for her. He held out his hand as she climbed the steps, pulling her close against the cold. "Ready for this?" he asked softly. "More than ready," Hannah replied. "I've been ready for a while now. Just took me time to realize it." "Then let's finish this journey," Dawson said. "Let's make this official and start our life together properly." "Our life together," Hannah repeated, testing the words. They felt right. They felt like coming home after a long exile, like finding solid ground after drifting. They felt like the beginning of something beautiful and lasting and true. "Our life together," Dawson confirmed and kissed her as the snow fell around them, blessing their future with soft white benediction. December arrived with clear, cold days that made everything sparkle like the world had been dipped in diamond dust. Hannah woke on the morning of her wedding, New Year's Day, 1880, to find frost patterns on the window that looked like lace, intricate and beautiful. She lay in bed for a moment, letting the reality wash over her. Today she would marry Dawson Baxter. Today she would become not just Hannah Crawford, widow and survivor, but Hannah Crawford Baxter, wife and partner in building a life she'd never dared dream possible. The past weeks had been a whirlwind of preparation and anticipation. The ranch had transformed under Mrs. Abernathy's determined direction, with evergreen boughs decorating the main house and candles ready to light when evening came. Neighbors had arrived yesterday from surrounding ranches, filling every available bed and making the Circle B feel alive with community and celebration. The wedding would take place at 3 o'clock, giving everyone time to rest from their travels and gather properly. Hannah rose and dressed carefully in her chemise and petticoat, her hands trembling slightly with nerves and excitement. A soft knock came at the cabin door, and Mrs. Abernathy entered carrying Hannah's wedding dress, freshly pressed and smelling faintly of lavender. "Let me help you," the older woman said, her eyes suspiciously bright. "Can't have the bride struggling with all these buttons on her own." As Mrs. Abernathy helped her into the deep blue wool dress, Hannah caught sight of herself in the small mirror propped on the dresser. The woman looking back at her bore little resemblance to the desperate widow who'd arrived at the Circle B 8 months ago. This woman had color in her cheeks, clarity in her eyes, and something that looked remarkably like happiness radiating from her face. "You're beautiful, dear," Mrs. Abernathy said, fastening the last button. "Dawson's going to forget how to speak when he sees you." "I'm nervous," Hannah admitted. "Not about marrying him, I'm sure about that, but about all these people watching, about making vows in front of everyone, about promising forever when forever seems like such a long, uncertain time," Mrs. Abernathy finished gently. "That's normal. But Hannah, you've already survived forever once. You know what it takes now, and this time you're starting from a place of strength instead of naive hope. That makes all the difference." Hannah nodded, touching the locket at her throat for courage. Inside were her sons' faces and, as of yesterday, a small photograph of her and Dawson taken by the traveling photographer who'd passed through last month. Dawson had insisted on having it made, saying he wanted to remember this moment, the anticipation, the joy, the beginning of their life together. "Is he nervous?" Hannah asked. "Pacing like a caged mountain lion," Mrs. Abernathy replied with a laugh. "Charlie finally told him to go check on the horses just to give everyone a break from watching him wear a hole in the floor." She squeezed Hannah's hands. "He loves you something fierce, dear. Anyone can see it, and you love him. That's all that matters today." After Mrs. Abernathy left, Hannah's boys came tumbling in, looking unfamiliarly neat in their new suits. Samuel immediately launched himself at her, hugging her waist. "You look like a princess, Mama. he declared. A very pretty princess, Noah added, more reserved but clearly pleased. Elijah stood slightly apart, and Hannah saw her own nervousness reflected in his serious young face. She went to him, taking his hands. "You ready for this?" she asked softly. "Are you?" he countered. "Really ready? Because once you say those vows, Mama, we're all in this together. We'll be Baxters. This will be our home for real." "I'm ready," Hannah said firmly. "Elijah, I know you've had to be strong for so long, had to worry about things no 12-year-old should worry about, but I need you to hear me now. Dawson is a good man. He'll take care of us. You don't have to carry the weight of the world anymore, sweetheart. You can just be a boy again." "What if something goes wrong?" Elijah whispered. "What if he changes? What if we lose this too?" Hannah pulled her eldest son close, feeling his thin shoulders shake with fears he'd been holding inside. "Then we'll face it together, all of us. But Eli, we can't live our lives waiting for disaster. I tried that for years, and all it did was make me miserable. At some point, you have to choose to trust, to hope, to believe that good things can last if you tend them carefully." Elijah pulled back, swiping at his eyes. "Pa used to make promises he didn't keep. How do I know Dawson's promises are different?" "Because Dawson's already kept the promises that matter most," Hannah said. "He promised us shelter, and he's given us a home. He promised honest work, and he's given me purpose. He promised respect, and he's shown it every single day. The wedding vows are just making official what's already true, that we're a family, chosen and built on something solid." "I miss Pa," Elijah said quietly. "Even though things were hard, even though I know Dawson's better for us, I still miss him sometimes." "Of course you do. He was your father, and it's right to miss him." Hannah cupped Elijah's face in her hands. "Marrying Dawson doesn't erase your pa or dishonor his memory. It just means we're moving forward, building something new, while still remembering where we came from. You can love your father's memory and accept Dawson as your stepfather. Both things can be true at once." Elijah nodded slowly, and Hannah saw some of the tension leave his shoulders. "Okay, I'm ready then. Let's go make this official." The wedding took place in the ranch's main living room, which had been transformed by evergreen boughs, white candles, and the warm presence of friends and neighbors. Father Murphy had traveled from Silverton to perform the ceremony, and he stood now before the stone fireplace, his weathered face kind as he waited for the bride. Hannah stood in the doorway with Elijah's arm linked through hers, looking at the gathered faces. There were the ranch hands, cleaned up and looking almost unrecognizable in their Sunday best. There were neighboring ranchers and their families, people she'd come to know through school and community gatherings. There was Mrs. Abernathy, beaming and dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. And there, at the front of the room, stood Dawson. He wore a new dark suit that emphasized his broad shoulders and made him look almost unbearably handsome. But it was his face that captured Hannah's attention, the way his eyes lit up when he saw her, the slight tremor in his hands that betrayed his nerves, the smile that transformed his weathered features into something approaching joy. This was the man who'd offered shelter in a storm and had given so much more. This was the man who'd seen her at her lowest and had helped her rebuild. This was the man who loved her sons as if they were his own, and who'd given her the security of land and independence even as he'd asked for her heart. This was the man she was choosing, freely and fully, to spend the rest of her life with. Elijah walked her forward with solemn dignity, and when they reached the front, he carefully placed her hand in Dawson's. The gesture was deliberate, ceremonial, her eldest son giving his blessing, acknowledging the transfer of responsibility while also recognizing that Hannah was choosing this for herself. "Take care of her," Elijah said quietly, so only Dawson could hear. "Take care of all of us." "I will," Dawson promised, his voice rough with emotion. "I swear it." Elijah nodded and stepped back to stand with his brothers, who were watching with wide eyes and barely contained excitement. Father Murphy began the ceremony, his voice carrying the weight of countless weddings performed over decades of ministry. Hannah heard the familiar words: love, honor, cherish, for better or worse, in sickness and health. But this time, they felt different. Not like empty promises or naive hopes, but like a genuine commitment between two people who understood exactly what they were undertaking. Dawson Baxter, Father Murphy said. Do you take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? To love her, comfort her, honor and keep her, in sickness and health, in sorrow and joy, forsaking all others, as long as you both shall live? I do, Dawson said, his eyes never leaving Hannah's face. With everything I am, I do. And Hannah Crawford, do you take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to love him, comfort him, honor and keep him, in sickness and health, in sorrow and joy, forsaking all others, as long as you both shall live? Hannah felt the weight of the moment settle over her, the significance of this choice, this commitment, this leap of faith into an uncertain future. But when she looked at Dawson, at his steady strength and patient love, the uncertainty faded. This was right. This was real. This was home. I do, she said clearly. With everything I am, I do. They exchanged rings, simple gold bands that Dawson had ordered from Denver months ago, waiting for this moment. As he slid the ring onto her finger, his hands were gentle but sure, and Hannah felt the physical weight of the commitment settling into place alongside the emotional one. By the power vested in me, Father Murphy said with a smile, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Dawson, you may kiss your bride. Dawson cupped Hannah's face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away tears she hadn't realized were falling, and kissed her softly. It was a promise and a beginning, tender and filled with hope. The room erupted in applause and cheers, but Hannah barely heard it. All she could focus on was Dawson's smile, the way he looked at her like she was the most precious thing in his world. Hello, wife, he murmured against her lips. Hello, husband, Hannah replied, testing the words. They fit perfectly. The celebration that followed was joyous and loud, filled with music and laughter and more food than Hannah had seen in one place in years. Mrs. Abernathy had outdone herself with a feast that included roasted beef, potatoes, fresh bread, vegetables from the root cellar, and a magnificent cake that made Samuel's eyes go wide with delight. Hannah moved through the party in a daze of happiness, accepting congratulations and well wishes from neighbors who'd become friends. Thomas Crawford and his wife Martha had come, and Thomas pulled Hannah aside during the festivities. I'm happy for you, he said awkwardly. Truly. Baxter's a good man, and you deserve good things after everything. Thank you, Thomas. That means a lot. Hannah found she bore no resentment toward her brother-in-law anymore. His rejection had hurt terribly at the time, but it had also pushed her toward this life, this man, this happiness. You and Martha are welcome to visit any time. The boys should know their uncle and aunt. Martha, standing nearby, burst into tears and hugged Hannah tightly. I wanted to help you so badly that day, she whispered, but Thomas was so set against it, and I didn't know how to change his mind. I'm so sorry. It's in the past, Hannah said gently. Let's focus on moving forward. Let's be family now, the way we should have been all along. As evening fell and the party showed no signs of slowing, Dawson found Hannah and pulled her aside onto the porch. The night was cold but clear, stars scattered across the sky like salt spilled on black velvet. They could hear the celebration continuing inside, music and laughter and the sounds of community, but out here it was quiet, intimate, theirs. Happy? Dawson asked, wrapping his coat around her shoulders. Completely, Hannah said, leaning into his warmth. I keep thinking I should pinch myself to make sure this is real. It's real. Dawson turned her to face him, his hands resting on her waist. You're my wife now, Hannah Baxter. We're bound together, legal and proper. You and me and your boys, our boys. We're a family. Our boys, Hannah repeated, loving the sound of it. Dawson, I need you to know something. I'm not coming to this marriage as some grateful woman who owes you everything. I'm coming as your equal, your partner. What we build together, we build as a team. I wouldn't want it any other way, Dawson said seriously. I don't need a grateful wife, Hannah. I need a strong partner who challenges me and supports me and builds this life alongside me. That's what you are. That's what we'll be. I love you, Hannah said, the words coming easier each time she spoke them. I love your strength and your kindness and the way you never made me feel less than for needing help. I love how you are with my sons, patient and fair and present in a way their father never managed to be. I love how you see me, really see me, not just the role I play, but the person I am underneath. And I love you, Dawson replied, his voice thick with emotion. Love your fierce determination and your tender heart. Love how you fight for what matters and refuse to give up even when everything seems impossible. Love how you've made this house feel like a home again, after so many years of it being just a place I lived. He paused, then added quietly, Sarah would have liked you, I think, would have appreciated your strength and your honesty. I think she'd be glad I found you, found happiness again. Hannah felt tears prick her eyes. James would have liked you too, would have envied me finding someone so steady and reliable. He always wished he could be those things, but never quite managed it. She touched the locket at her throat. We're honoring their memories by living fully, by choosing joy. That's what they'd want for us. They stood together in the cold starlight, two people who'd known profound loss and had somehow found each other in the aftermath. The sounds of celebration drifted out from the house, their boys laughing, Mrs. Abernathy's voice raised in song, the stomp of boots on wooden floors as someone started dancing. Should we go back in? Hannah asked. In a minute. Dawson pulled her closer. I want to remember this moment, just the two of us, at the beginning of our life together. I want to remember how you look right now with starlight in your hair and hope on your face. Want to remember that we chose this, chose each other, despite all the reasons we could have stayed safe and separate. I'll remember too, Hannah promised. We'll remember that you gave me more than shelter and employment. You gave me back myself, reminded me I was more than just a survivor, more than just a mother fighting to keep her children fed. You saw the woman underneath all that struggle and loved her anyway. They kissed again, longer this time, a kiss that spoke of promises and passion and the long life stretching out before them. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathless and smiling. Come on, Mrs. Baxter, Dawson said, taking her hand. Let's go celebrate our marriage properly. And later, after everyone's gone to bed, I'll show you the surprise I've been working on. What surprise? If I told you, it wouldn't be a surprise. Dawson's eyes twinkled with mischief. Trust me? Always, Hannah said, and meant it. The party continued late into the night with music and dancing and storytelling that had everyone laughing until their sides hurt. Hannah danced with Dawson, with her sons, with ranch hands and neighbors who'd become friends. She ate cake and accepted toasts and felt more alive than she had in years. Samuel fell asleep on Charlie's lap around 9 o'clock, exhausted from excitement. Noah followed an hour later, curled up on the sofa with his head on Elijah's shoulder. Only Elijah remained awake as the party wound down, helping clear dishes and watching the adults with the solemn interest of a boy on the cusp of understanding grown-up matters. Finally, around midnight, the last of the guests retreated to their rooms or the bunkhouse, leaving the main house quiet. Mrs. Abernathy shooed Hannah and Dawson toward the door with a knowing smile. Off with you both. I'll make sure the boys get tucked in properly. Go enjoy your wedding night. Hannah blushed, but let Dawson lead her out into the cold night. They didn't head toward the main house or her cabin, but instead walked toward the barn. Hannah gave him a questioning look. The surprise is in here, Dawson explained, pushing open the barn door. Inside, lamplight glowed warm and golden, but it wasn't coming from the main barn area. It was coming from what had been the old tack room. Dawson led Hannah there and opened the door with a flourish. Hannah gasped. The tack room had been completely transformed into a cozy private space. A proper bed dominated the center, piled high with quilts and pillows. A small stove in the corner radiated heat. Rugs covered the floor and curtains framed a window that looked out over the moonlit pastures. Books lined a shelf on one wall, and there was even a small table with 2 chairs. I know it's not fancy, Dawson said nervously, but I wanted us to have our own space, at least for tonight, somewhere private where we could really start our marriage. Tomorrow we'll figure out the permanent living arrangements, whether you want to move into the main house or build onto your cabin or whatever you prefer. But tonight, this is ours. Hannah walked into the room slowly, taking in every thoughtful detail. The books were ones she'd mentioned wanting to read. The quilts were ones Mrs. Abernathy had been working on for months, she now realized. Even the curtains matched the blue of her wedding dress. You did all this for me? She whispered. For us, Dawson corrected. I wanted our first night as husband and wife to be special. Wanted you to feel cherished and valued and loved. Hannah turned to him with tears streaming down her face. Happy tears this time. Grateful tears. How did I get so lucky? How did I stumble into your life right when I needed you most? I think we stumbled into each other's lives right when we both needed it, Dawson said, pulling her close. You needed shelter and purpose. I needed hope and a reason to live instead of just survive. We saved each other, Hannah. That's what makes this real. He kissed her then, and Hannah kissed him back with all the love and passion and gratitude she'd been holding inside. They'd both walked through fire to get here, through loss and grief and desperation, and somehow they'd found each other on the other side. Found healing in shared understanding, found strength in mutual respect, found love in the most unexpected of places. When morning came, Hannah woke wrapped in her husband's arms, warm and safe and happier than she'd ever imagined possible. Pale winter light filtered through the curtains, painting everything in soft gold. She could hear the sounds of the ranch waking up outside, horses nickering, the ranch hands starting their day, Mrs. Abernathy's voice calling the boys to breakfast. Her boys. Their boys now. Good morning, wife, Dawson murmured against her hair. Good morning, husband. Hannah smiled against his chest. What happens now? Now we live, Dawson said simply. We work the ranch and raise the boys and build the life we want. Nothing magical, nothing extraordinary, just us, together, making choices and facing challenges and finding joy in the everyday. That sounds perfect, Hannah said. And it did. After years of chasing impossible dreams with James, after months of desperate survival, the idea of simply living, building something steady and real, felt like the greatest gift imaginable. They dressed and made their way to the main house, where breakfast was already underway. Mrs. Abernathy had outdone herself again with pancakes and bacon and eggs that made the whole kitchen smell like heaven. The boys were gathered around the table, still in their nightshirts, hair mussed from sleep. Mama! Samuel launched himself at Hannah the moment she walked in. You're married now. You're really married. I really am, Hannah confirmed, scooping him up. Which means Dawson is officially your stepfather now. What do you think about that? I think it's good, Samuel said seriously. Can I call him Pa? Hannah looked at Dawson, who nodded with suspiciously bright eyes. If that's what you want to call me, I'd be honored, he told Samuel. Then Pa it is, Samuel declared, and wiggled down to return to his breakfast. Noah was more reserved, but clearly pleased, while Elijah studied Dawson with that serious expression he got when he was thinking hard about something important. Mr. Dawson, Elijah started. You can call me whatever you're comfortable with, Dawson interrupted gently. Dawson, Mr. Baxter, or eventually Pa, if that feels right. There's no rush, no pressure. I think I'll stick with Dawson for now, Elijah said, but I wanted to say thank you for taking care of Mama, for taking care of us. I know we're not your blood children, but you're mine now, Dawson said firmly. Blood or not, you're mine, all three of you, and I'll do everything in my power to give you a good life, to teach you what I know, to be someone you can count on. That's my promise to you boys, same as it is to your mother. Elijah nodded, satisfied, and returned to his breakfast. But Hannah saw the relief on his face, the loosening of tension he'd been carrying for far too long. After breakfast, the guests began departing, heading back to their own ranches and lives. Hannah stood on the porch with Dawson, waving goodbye to neighbors who'd become friends, feeling the satisfaction of community and belonging. Thomas and Martha were among the last to leave. Take care of yourself, Hannah, Martha said, hugging her tightly. And come visit us sometime. The children would love to know their cousins. We will, Hannah promised. Families should stay connected. After everyone had gone and the ranch settled back into its normal rhythm, Dawson called a family meeting in the main house. He, Hannah, and the three boys gathered in the living room, the winter sun streaming through the windows. Now that your mother and I are married, Dawson began, we need to make some decisions about how we want to live. The cabin is yours by right. It was part of your mother's employment agreement. But there's plenty of room in this house, and I'd like us all to be together under one roof if you're amenable. What do you boys think? Could we each have our own room? Noah asked hopefully. You could, Dawson confirmed. There are 4 empty bedrooms upstairs. You each could have your own space. I vote for moving into the big house, Samuel said immediately. It's warmer and has more room to play when it's cold outside. Elijah? Hannah prompted. Her eldest son considered carefully. Will we still own the cabin? Still have it as ours? Absolutely, Dawson said. In fact, as you boys get older, one of you might want to use it. When you're grown and starting out on your own, you'll have that space. Then I think we should move into the main house, Elijah decided. Be a real family all together. Real family it is, Hannah said, her heart full. When should we move our things? No rush, Dawson said. Take your time, settle in at your own pace. This is your home now, all of it. You get to decide how to make it yours. Over the following weeks, they settled into new rhythms. The boys moved into the main house, each claiming a bedroom and slowly personalizing their spaces. Hannah consolidated her teaching materials and personal belongings, marveling at how much more spacious everything felt. She and Dawson took over the large bedroom on the second floor, and Mrs. Abernathy moved to a smaller room on the first floor that she declared much more sensible for a woman my age with complaining knees. The ranch work continued as always, with Dawson managing the business and Hannah teaching school 3 days a week, while helping with household duties the rest of the time. But now there was a new dimension to everything, the sense of partnership, of building something together, a family in the truest sense. Hannah discovered that marriage to Dawson was different from anything she'd experienced with James. Where James had been impulsive and dreamy, often making decisions without consulting her, Dawson sought her opinion on everything from cattle sales to what color to paint the barn. Where James had withdrawn when times were hard, Dawson became more present, more communicative. Where James had seen her domestic skills as her only value, Dawson celebrated her teaching and encouraged her intellectual pursuits. You're different than I expected, Hannah told him one evening as they sat by the fire, her knitting needles clicking softly. More partner than patriarch. I had a good teacher, Dawson replied. My mother, before she died, she made it clear to my father that their marriage was a partnership, that he needed her wisdom as much as she needed his strength. I remember watching them make decisions together, respecting each other's views. That's the kind of marriage I want. That's the kind of marriage I want too, Hannah said. The kind where we both have a voice, where we face things together. Then that's what we'll have, Dawson promised. Winter deepened, bringing snow and cold that kept everyone close to home. The school closed for a few weeks during the worst of it, and Hannah used the time to catch up on mending and planning lessons for spring. The boys thrived, growing stronger and more confident with each passing day. Samuel lost a tooth and was convinced the tooth fairy would leave him something extra special because I live on a ranch now. Noah became obsessed with learning to rope, practicing for hours with patient instruction from Charlie, and Elijah, at Dawson's encouragement, started keeping a journal, recording life on the ranch and his observations about everything from weather patterns to cattle behavior. On Valentine's Day, Dawson surprised Hannah with a trip to town, just the two of them, leaving the boys in Mrs. Abernathy's capable hands. They had dinner at the restaurant, browsed the general store, and visited the library where Hannah discovered they'd received a shipment of new books. Dawson bought her 6 books without batting an eye at the cost, saying simply, "You need them for teaching. Consider it an investment in the ranch's future." As they drove home in the wagon, wrapped in blankets against the cold, Hannah reflected on how different her life had become. A year ago, I was watching James die in a camp outside Pueblo, she said quietly. I was terrified and alone, and had no idea how we'd survive. Now look at me. Married to a good man, living in a real home, teaching children, watching my boys grow into who they're meant to be. It feels like a dream sometimes. It's not a dream, Dawson said, pulling her closer. It's real life. Hard-earned, well-deserved real life. Do you ever worry it will all fall apart? Hannah asked. That we'll wake up one day and discover we've been fooling ourselves? Sometimes, Dawson admitted. But then I remember that we've both survived the worst life can throw at us. We've been tested by loss and hardship and desperation, and we're still standing. That's not luck or foolishness, that's strength. So if challenges come, and they will, We'll face them the way we've faced everything else. Together. Together, Hannah echoed, and the word felt like a talisman against fear, a promise that she'd never have to face the darkness alone again. Spring came late that year, but when it arrived, it transformed the ranch into something magical. Wildflowers carpeted the meadows in waves of purple and yellow and white. Calves were born, their long legs wobbling as they took their first steps. The creek swelled with snowmelt, rushing and tumbling over rocks in joyful chaos. And Hannah discovered she was pregnant. She'd suspected for a few weeks, but had waited to be certain before telling anyone. Now, sitting at the breakfast table with Dawson and the boys on a bright April morning, she felt the news bubbling up inside her, demanding to be shared. "I have something to tell everyone," she said, setting down her coffee cup. 5 faces turned to her expectantly. Dawson, the 3 boys, and Mrs. Abernathy, who'd joined them for breakfast. "I'm expecting a baby," Hannah said simply. "Sometime in the fall, we'll have a new addition to the family." For a moment, there was stunned silence. Then Samuel whooped, Noah grinned, and Elijah's face split into a rare, unguarded smile. But it was Dawson's reaction that Hannah focused on, the way his eyes filled with tears, the way his hand shook as he reached for hers, the naked hope and joy and wonder on his face. "A baby?" he whispered. "We're having a baby." "We are," Hannah confirmed. "Are you happy?" "Happy doesn't begin to cover it," Dawson said roughly. He stood and pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. "Hannah, I never thought. After losing Sarah and our baby, I never let myself hope I'd have another chance at fatherhood. But now," his voice broke, "now I get to do it right. Get to be there from the beginning, get to watch you carry our child and be present for every moment." "Am I going to be a big brother?" Samuel asked, bouncing in his chair. "Can I teach the baby things?" "You're already a big brother to Noah," Elijah pointed out. "But yes, now you'll be one to the new baby too. We all will be." "I hope it's a girl," Noah said thoughtfully. "Too many boys around here already." "Boy or girl, it'll be loved," Mrs. Abernathy declared, dabbing at her eyes. "Lord, this ranch is going to be even more alive with children running around. Mr. Baxter, you realize you're going to have 4 children? 4! "Can't wait," Dawson said, his arms still around Hannah. "The more the merrier." The pregnancy brought its own challenges. Hannah suffered from morning sickness that lasted well into the afternoon, and the fatigue made teaching difficult some days. But Dawson was endlessly patient, taking over tasks she normally handled and making sure she rested when she needed to. The boys were surprisingly helpful too, with even Samuel understanding when his mother needed quiet. As spring turned to summer, Hannah's belly grew round and unmistakable. The school term ended, and she spent long golden days preparing a nursery in one of the unused upstairs rooms. Mrs. Abernathy helped her sew tiny gowns and blankets, while the boys debated baby names with surprising seriousness. "If it's a girl, we should name her Rose," Samuel suggested, "because she'll be pretty like a flower." "If it's a boy, maybe Henry," Elijah offered. "That's a strong name." Dawson let Hannah make the final decision, though he admitted he liked traditional names that honored family when possible. They decided to wait until the baby arrived to choose, wanting to see who the child was before attaching a name. On a warm September evening, as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, Hannah went into labor. It was earlier than expected, but not dangerously so, and Dawson immediately sent Charlie to fetch the midwife who lived 20 miles away. In the meantime, Mrs. Abernathy took charge with the calm efficiency of someone who'd delivered more than a few babies in her time. "You've done this before, dear," the older woman reminded Hannah as contractions began in earnest. "You know what to expect. Just breathe through it and trust your body." Dawson refused to leave despite Mrs. Abernathy's suggestion that he wait downstairs with the boys. "I wasn't there when Sarah delivered," he said firmly. "Wasn't there when she needed me most. I'm not making that mistake again. I'm staying right here with Hannah." Hannah was grateful for his presence. His strong hands held hers through the contractions. His steady voice talked her through the pain. His unwavering belief that everything would be all right gave her strength when her own faltered. The midwife arrived just as things were getting intense, and she immediately took over with practiced skill. She checked Hannah, pronounced everything progressing normally, and settled in for what she predicted would be another few hours of labor. She was wrong. An hour later, with Dawson holding Hannah's hand and Mrs. Abernathy coaching her through the final pushes, a baby girl entered the world with a lusty cry that proclaimed her healthy and strong. "A daughter!" the midwife announced, placing the squalling infant on Hannah's chest. "Congratulations! You have a beautiful baby girl." Hannah looked down at her daughter, red-faced and angry at being evicted from her warm home, but undeniably perfect, and felt love crash over her like a wave. This tiny person, this miracle, was hers, theirs, the physical proof that good things could grow from loss and hardship. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "Welcome to our family." Dawson was crying openly, his hand gentle as he stroked the baby's downy head. "She's perfect. Hannah, she's absolutely perfect." "What will you name her?" Mrs. Abernathy asked. Hannah looked at Dawson, and in that moment, she knew exactly what the baby's name should be. "Grace," she said. "Grace Sarah Baxter. Because she's a gift of grace we never expected, and because she honors the woman who came before." Dawson's breath caught. "You'd do that? Name her after Sarah?" "Sarah was part of your story, part of what made you who you are," Hannah said gently. "And this baby is part of our story, proof that love can bloom again after loss. Grace, Sarah, feels right." "It's perfect," Dawson whispered, pressing a kiss to Hannah's forehead. "You're perfect. Our family is perfect." The boys were allowed in shortly after, tiptoeing into the room with wide eyes and hushed voices. Samuel climbed carefully onto the bed to peer at his new sister. "She's tiny," he announced, "like a kitten." "She'll grow," Elijah said, but even he looked awed by the small person in their mother's arms. "Can I hold her?" Noah asked. Hannah showed them how to support the baby's head, and one by one, the boys held their new sister, their faces a mixture of curiosity and fierce protectiveness. This was their family now, Hannah thought. Not bound by blood alone, but by choice and love and shared determination to build something lasting. The first weeks with Grace were exhausting but joyful. Hannah recovered quickly from the birth, and Dawson proved to be a devoted father, walking the floors with Grace at night and changing diapers without complaint. The boys doted on their sister, with even Elijah, who'd been uncertain about becoming a big brother again at 13, melting into smiles whenever Grace grabbed his finger. As autumn painted the ranch in gold and crimson, Hannah stood on the porch one evening with Grace asleep in her arms and watched Dawson work with the boys in the corral below. He was teaching them to gentle a young horse, demonstrating patience and technique, while all three boys listened with rapt attention. This was her life now. Not the one she'd imagined when she'd married James all those years ago, full of grand adventures and impossible dreams. This was better, more real, more solid, more filled with genuine love and purpose. She had a home that couldn't be taken away, land in her own name, meaningful work teaching children, a husband who treated her as an equal partner, 4 healthy children, and a future that felt secure. She thought about that desperate woman who'd stood in the dusty street of Willow Creek with $20 and 3 frightened boys, begging for help from family who'd turned her away. That woman had felt like a failure, like someone the world had given up on. But she hadn't been a failure. She'd been at a crossroads, being pushed towards something better, even though she couldn't see it at the time. Thomas's rejection had forced her to the Circle B. The Circle B had led her to Dawson. Dawson had given her the foundation to rebuild not just her life, but herself. "Mama, look!" Samuel's voice carried across the yard. "I'm doing it! The horse likes me!" Hannah smiled and waved, then looked down at Grace, who was beginning to stir. The baby's eyes, blue like her father's, blinked open, and Hannah felt that rush of overwhelming love that still surprised her with its intensity. "You're so lucky, little one," she whispered to her daughter. "You're being born into safety and love, into a family that chose each other and fights for each other. You'll never know what it's like to be desperate or afraid, or wondering where your next meal will come from. That's my gift to you, the security I fought so hard to find." Dawson climbed the porch steps then, sweaty from work but smiling. "How are my girls?" "Perfect," Hannah said, and meant it. "We're absolutely perfect. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, careful not to jostle the baby, and they stood together watching the sun sink toward the mountains. The boys' laughter drifted up from the corral. Smoke rose from the chimney where Mrs. Abernathy was preparing supper. Cattle lowed in the distance. Everything spoke of life and continuity and home. "Happy?" Dawson asked softly, echoing the question he'd asked so many times before. "Completely," Hannah replied, the same answer she always gave, but with even more conviction now. "I have everything I need right here. You, the boys, Grace, this land, this life we've built. It's more than I ever dreamed possible." "We've come a long way," Dawson mused. "Both of us. From loss and loneliness to this, to family and purpose and joy." "The road was hard," Hannah acknowledged, "but I wouldn't change it. Every difficulty, every setback, every moment of despair, it all led here. To this moment, to this family, to this home." She turned in his arms so she could see his face, this man who'd given her so much more than shelter and employment, who'd given her back herself and shown her what real partnership looked like, who loved her with a steady, unwavering devotion that made her feel cherished every single day. "Thank you," she said, "for seeing me that day when I drove up desperate and afraid, for taking a chance on a widow with 3 children and nothing to offer but hard work, for showing me what home really means." "Thank you for letting me," Dawson replied, "for trusting me with your heart when you had every reason to guard it carefully, for bringing life and laughter back to this ranch, for giving me a family again." He pressed a kiss to the top of Grace's head, then to Hannah's lips, "for giving me a reason to believe in second chances." As the last light faded from the sky and stars began to emerge, they went inside together. The house was warm and bright, filled with the sounds of family, Mrs. Abernathy calling them to supper, the boys arguing good-naturedly about whose turn it was to set the table, the crackle of the fire in the hearth. Hannah looked around the room at all these faces she loved, at this life she'd built from the ashes of loss and desperation, and felt peace settle into her bones. She was home, not just in a physical place, though the Circle B would always be that for her, but home in a deeper sense, in herself, in her relationships, in the knowledge that she was exactly where she belonged. The widow who'd found home again was a widow no more. She was a wife, a mother, a teacher, a partner. She was Hannah Crawford Baxter, and she'd earned every bit of joy she now held. From rejection to belonging, from sorrow to joy, from desperation to abundance, the journey had been long and hard and sometimes unbearable, but it had brought her here, to this moment, to this family, to this love, and that made every struggle worth it. As they gathered around the table for supper, Dawson at one end and Hannah at the other with their children between them, "Someone, Samuel probably," said Grace. Hannah listened to the familiar words with her hand resting over her heart, feeling the locket there with its photographs of her family, and added her own silent prayer of thanksgiving. For second chances, for grace that blooms from dust, for love that heals old wounds, for family chosen and built with intention and care, for home, finally and forever found. For all of it, every beautiful, hard-won bit of it, thank you.